Chapter 8:16. Dean, I understand. His face was filled with excitement and emotion. Whether it was the blood test or the blood transfusion to save people, it was like a new window had been opened, allowing Yuan Hepping to see a new world. He could even assert that once the blood transfusion to save people worked, who knew how many people would benefit and how many people would be saved from the brink of death. Of course, all of these procedures had to be up to standard. Only when there were no problems would it be considered saving people. Otherwise, it would be harming people. In the ward, Yang Si was lying peacefully. After the fresh blood entered his body, his condition was much better than before. At least, there was more color on his face. This made Xiaowei, who had been accompanying him, extremely excited. When she saw that it was the sixth young master who had entered the ward, she hurriedly stood up in a panic and wanted to kneel on the ground to thank him. Yang Chendong was quick to react. He blocked the kneeling knee and shook his head gently. Don't thank me. I should be thanking Yang Si. If it wasn't for him, I'm afraid I would be a dead man. No, the sixth young master is invincible. Even God is afraid of you. He would never dare to accept you. Xiaowei was shocked when she heard Yang Chendong's words of gratitude. As a servant, shouldn't it be his duty to protect the master? How could he deserve a word of thanks? Yang Chendong did not explain anything. Instead, he carefully observed Yang Si's condition. When he found that everything had stabilized, he was relieved. After comforting him for a while, he left the ward. Outside, Beta Persei, Yang San, Yang Lu, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, and the others were all looking at him as if they were looking at a god. They had all seen Yang Si's injuries, especially Qiu Vi. As the first person besides Yang Chendong to see the injuries, his first thought was that brother Yang Si was definitely going to die. Although it was difficult for him to accept the news and he was very sad, there were always deaths when looking for a fight. To be able to die protecting the sixth young master was originally a very glorious thing. However, he never expected that he would be saved. Although he was still in a coma, didn't Yuan Hepping say that he had lost a lot of blood? It was just excessive blood loss, nothing serious. It was only a matter of time before he woke up. A person who had been stabbed so many times that the bones in his back were exposed. His entire body had long been dyed red with blood. Even a person who was called by the King of Hell could be saved alive. At this moment, this only increased their respect for the sixth young master. If they followed such a person, what else did they have to worry about? What else did they have to worry about? Seeing a few pairs of eyes looking at him with admiration, Yang Chendong coughed softly. He took this opportunity to teach these tough men who killed without blinking on the battlefield a lesson. Do you see? This is the importance of knowledge. In the future, when you face doctors, teachers, and some scientific researchers, you have to be more polite. Sometimes, bravery alone is useless. Brains and knowledge play an especially important role. Yes, we understand. Beta Persei and the others nodded in agreement. Yang Chendong was just taking this opportunity to improve the status of a cultured person. If a country wanted to develop, it was not enough to rely on strong military force. Cultivating both civil and military skills was the long-term way. Okay, Yang Si should be fine. You don't have to stay here. Go do whatever you need to do. Yes, young master. Jining is still detained by us in the village. How do you want to deal with her? Beta Persei nodded repeatedly. Then, he thought of the representatives of Ming and became angry. At the beginning of the battle, Ming could have saved her, but they did not. No matter how they dealt with Jining now, it would not be too much. I'll take care of his matters myself. You just have to accompany me later. Of course, Yang Chendong was aware of what had happened at the scene. Although he had been in the carriage to save people, he was equally aware of what had happened outside. Beta Persei had just finished speaking when Yang San continued. Young master, our security bureau has not done well this time. I have already ordered the removal of the current director of the security bureau of Ming from his position in the capital. He will be brought back to Chichen City for investigation. At the same time, I also sent someone to the scene to investigate and confirm that the person behind the assassination was hiding in a house 300 meters away from the scene. It was only because he retreated quickly that he escaped first. Now, our people have already caught up. Although we may not be able to catch the murderer, it is still possible to find out the true identity of the culprit based on these clues. This time, the Security Bureau had not received any news beforehand. It was true that they had not done their job well, but when he thought about it, wasn't he too careless? He had thought that Jining would negotiate with him on behalf of Ming, so he could sit back and relax. He had lost the vigilance that he should have. Even when he entered the capital, he did not bring enough armed forces with him. In the end, 9 of his brothers were killed. He was also responsible for this. Even if he was responsible, Yang Chendong did not want to blame others. He did not want to do such a thing that was already lenient to others, so after listening to Yang San's report, he waved his hand. I won't ask what the Security Bureau wants to do this time. In short, we must find the real culprit. We can't let our 9 brothers die in vain. Yes, young master, don't worry. They won't be able to escape. Yang San was grateful that Yang Chendong did not reprimand him, but at the same time, he made up his mind that he would not retreat until he found the real culprit. Even if the Security Bureau had to pay the price, he would accept it. All right, you guys go to your own things. Xiuvi, Dao Xiao, you guys do your job well at the memorial service. I will attend it personally. Beta Persei, let's go. Yang Chendong reached out and patted Captain Xiuvi's shoulder, then turned and left. Xiuvi and Dao Xiao, who were left behind, were extremely excited. Although the 9 brothers who had died protecting the 6th young master, this was their duty. Compared to the soldiers from other divisions, regiments, and battalions who had to fight for military merits on the battlefield, their treatment was better and their conditions were better. With this, no one would regret their deaths. Instead, it was a kind of glory. Didn't the 6th young master say that he would attend the memorial service personally? This was giving face to his brothers. Based on this, if something similar were to happen in the future, how could he worry that his brothers would not do their best? Xiuvi and the others were still feeling emotional and moved when Yang Chendong, accompanied by Beta Persei, arrived at the negotiation room in the academy. When the door was pushed open, they saw Chief Eunuch Jining and Commander Lu Gue of the Brocade Guard with bitter expressions on their faces. As soon as they saw Yang Chendong appear, they immediately stood up. Jin Ying's expression was even more careful, as if he wanted to smile but did not dare to. As the recorder and a woman, Junko did not ride out of the manor with Beta Persei and the others after knowing that a red signal had appeared in the capital. She did not have the qualifications to do so. The only thing she could do was to stay behind and watch the actions of Jin Ying and the others. In order to prevent these people from causing trouble, the captain of the Langus Special Forces, Tai Hu, personally took action. He set up an array in the room and released his aura that had killed countless people. Even Lu Gue did not dare to move, let alone the others. Not long after, Yang Chendong and the others returned to the manor. Junko also ran over to take a look. She saw the pale Yang Chendong and Yang Si, who had lost too much blood and was barely alive. Just when she thought that brother Yang Si was definitely dead, her classmates in the academy sent her news. He had been saved using a very advanced technology called blood transfusion. Food could be transported, weapons and armor could be transported, and when could even the blood of a person be transported? Filled with curiosity, she went to take a look, and then saw a scene that shocked her. Bags of blood were really sent into Yang Si's body through plastic and transparent tubes. He was actually fine. This incident had a great impact on Junko's heart. She, who had been in the Yang family manor for 2 years, naturally knew a little about the strength of the mercenaries. But just the strength of the military was not surprising. Which dynasty didn't have the strongest army in the world in their hands? But what really caught Junko's attention was the knowledge taught in the Yang family's academy. This kind of teaching philosophy was completely different from Confucianism. It involved a wide range of knowledge, which was really an eye-opener for her. Perhaps this was the true reason why the mercenaries were so powerful. In 2 years, she believed that she had learned a lot of knowledge that she did not dare to think about before. But today's blood transfusion greatly stimulated her. Even a person who was bound to die could be saved. What else could the 6th young master not do? If one day, the mercenaries really wanted to become enemies with Japan, what could they use to resist? What could they use to resist? Junko, who had complicated thoughts, focused her gaze on Yang Chendong the moment he pushed the door open. She could not move her gaze away for a long time. Yang Chendong, who was being looked at, did not care. Because the moment he pushed the door open, almost everyone in the room looked at him. Especially Jin Ying's gaze. There was respect, fear, and even a bit of flattery in her eyes. Yes, this popular person by Daizong's side was someone that even the ministers wanted to curry favor with. At this moment, when she looked at Yang Chendong, she showed a flattering expression. What happened had not been hidden from him. On the contrary, someone had specially reported it to him. It was because of this that Jining very keenly discovered the problem. In this operation, although Ming was not the main culprit, they could not shirk their responsibility. The assassins were probably not sent by Emperor Daizong. Otherwise, why would he waste his time negotiating with the mercenaries here? But it was true that they were not the ones who sent the assassins, but they did not take any action to save him. This was too wrong. Chapter 8:17. Jining could even guess that the moment this incident occurred, the news must have reached the emperor as soon as possible. The emperor was probably already thinking about getting someone else to do his dirty work, but he also didn't think about it. If the Duke of Loyalty had really met with an accident in Ming's capital, the mercenaries wouldn't just let it go. At that time, no one would listen to their explanation, and a major battle would be unavoidable. Putting aside whether or not Ming could win, at the very least, they would have lost the chance to destroy the southern Ming Empire and contend for hegemony over the world. Jining did not believe that the emperor, who had always been wise and far-sighted, would not be able to see such a simple logic. The reason he had not done so was probably because he was too afraid of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage and wanted him dead too much. Fortunately, at the last moment, Ming had still sent out their troops. This action would at least win back some points and some trust. This was why Jining was gratified, but also why he was hesitant, because this was only his own wishful thinking. He wasn't sure if Yang Chendong would think this way. If Yang Chendong blamed the assassination on him and killed him in a fit of rage, then given the current situation, even if the emperor was angry, there would be nothing he could do. This also meant that Jin Ying's life was in Yang Chendong's hands. How could Jining not be afraid of this man who could decide his life and death with a single word? How could he not curry favor with him? Jining smiled obsequiously. Lu Gue and the others lowered their heads, not daring to meet Yang Chendong's gaze. The atmosphere in the room suddenly quieted down. I am very angry. It was still Yang Chendong who spoke first. He found the chair at the head of the group and sat down. His gaze fell on Jin Ying and Lu Gue as he spoke. Yes, this Gong Gong can understand. Jining also spoke up. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I can guarantee that this matter is definitely not His Majesty's intention. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here to negotiate with you. As for Dong Chunhua, who started the trouble, she will be severely punished. I can assure you of this. Jining had taken the initiative to throw Dong Chunhua out to express her attitude. She was saying that she had the same attitude as Dong Chunhua on this matter. Yang Chendong was quite satisfied with this attitude, but if this was the only benefit, he would definitely not agree. It's not enough. Jian Jie's words expressed his feelings. Yes. What else should I do? Please tell me, High Duke. As long as I can do it, I will do my best. Jining also knew that throwing out Dong Chunhua was not enough to appease Yang Chendong's anger, even though he was already a second-rank official of the imperial court. Jin Ying's sensible behavior made Yang Chendong, who had been keeping a straight face, finally smile. It was easy to talk to smart people. At the very least, there was no need to waste so much time. All right, then I'll make a few requests. At the Dong residence in the capital, as the temporary emperor, Dong Chunhua had been in a rush to get close to him the moment he ascended the throne, and his life had been very smooth these last few years. Relying on his ability to see through the sun of heaven and doing many things to cater to him, he had been promoted again and again. There was now news that he would be replacing the imperial censor of the left, Chen Yi, in the imperial censorate. Although they were both second-rank officials of the imperial court, there were still some differences between the left and the right. One's words carried enormous weight while the other had to look at the other's eyes. When he had been promoted from left deputy imperial censor to right imperial censor, Dong Chunhua had been extremely satisfied. But it didn't take long for him to have more pursuits. causing him to completely forget his duties. Everything he did was completely behind the acting emperor. Sometimes, he even had to play the role of the acting emperor. Now, his efforts were about to be repaid. Finally, his dreams were about to come true. How could he not be happy at this moment? Extreme joy begets sorrow. This was Dong Chunhua. Originally, he thought that he would be on the same level as the other ministers, but he never thought that such a thing would happen today. Being humiliated by Yang Chendong wasn't a big deal. After all, he was someone who could even force a minister to death. But the wrong thing was that the loyal duke shouldn't have been assassinated after this and almost lost his life. Even if Yang Chendong was dead, Dong Chunhua wouldn't be as scared as he was now. After all, what could a dead person do to him? Besides, once such a thing happened, the temporary emperor would definitely put someone like him in an important position and promote him in order to better stabilize the court. The problem was that the person didn't die. Looking at the cause of the matter, it was because he was poisoned by the food he ate that caused the other party to walk out of the Yang family manor, resulting in the assassination this time. Thinking about it from the beginning to the end, it seemed that he was the root of the disaster. Patting his conscience, Dong Chunhua really didn't know that there would be an assassination. Everything was really a coincidence. But now, would anyone believe what he was saying? After knowing that Yang Chendong was surrounded and killed, Dong Chunhua was completely frightened. Following that, he kept praying in his heart, hoping that the assassins would succeed. When the housekeeper who was sent to inquire about the news came back and said that the loyal duke seemed to be injured, but it wasn't a big problem, he plopped back on the chair. He knew that this time, he was really finished. Yang Chendong didn't die, and his appearance was too coincidental. There was no way to explain this matter, and presumably, no one would be willing to listen to his explanation. Even the temporary emperor wouldn't see him. Otherwise, wouldn't it mean that this matter was related to the emperor? Knowing that no one could save him, Dong Chunhua leaned on the chair like a stall. When the sky was already dark, suddenly, there was a huge commotion outside the residence. A group of embroidered uniform guards rushed into the residence like wolves and tigers. The person in the lead was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gue. Last time, a group of embroidered uniform guards also rushed into the Hu residence, but the leader was only a Baihu called Tong Lai. Now that Lu Gue had appeared, it was obvious that there was no turning back. Lu Gue flashed the driver's license in his hand. Then he looked at the flustered Dong Chunhua and said, "Master Dong, you are suspected of being involved in the murder of an important official. You are suspected of colluding with a foreign country. Now, please come with us." Since the charges had been laid out, Dong Chunhua naturally wouldn't admit it. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "No, it must be a misunderstanding. Everything is a misunderstanding. I want to see the emperor. I want to see the emperor." Dong Chunhua was still making a final struggle, but Lu Gue wouldn't give him such a chance. His eyes were cold as he shook his head. "Master Dong, you should save these words for the imperial edict and the cold torture instruments. Come, take him away." Dong Chunhua had been taken away. It could be foreseen that such a big thing had happened, almost taking the lives of Jining and the commander of the brocade guards. In addition, Dai Zong also had to take an evasive attitude. His future was already set in stone, and he would die without a doubt. At the same time, in the Yang Manor, the 9 members of the first guard who had died in battle were undergoing a solemn memorial service. Yang Chendong personally attended, his expression solemn. 2 years ago, he had dealt with the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. 2 years later, another second-rank official was also arrested because he had offended the Duke of Loyalty. Once this matter was out, Yang Chendong's reputation was once again expanded. It also caused more people to fear the Duke from the bottom of their hearts. Not long after this incident, the imperial edict eunuch in the palace went to the Hu residence and announced a series of appointments. He appointed Hu Zhangning as a member of the embroidered uniform guards, secondary 3rd rank. Hu Zhangning was originally a guardian, 5th rank, the right commander of the 5 cities military department and the general guarding the Yongding Gate. This was the request that Yang Chendong had made to Jining. With this assassination attempt, he had made it clear that he did not trust the Baiming army. Only his own father-in-law could be trusted. In order to repair the relationship between the two sides, Jining expressed his agreement. However, this appointment still had to be reported to the emperor for the final decision. Now that the appointment had been announced, it was a sign that Zhu Qiyu was conceding. Yang Chendong was even more gratified. With these official positions and titles, if anything happened in the capital, the Hu clan would have the power to protect itself. There was no need to worry too much. In the imperial palace, Jin Ying was still kneeling in the main hall, her head lowered as she faced Zhu Qiyu on the golden dragon throne. She had already listed all of Yang Chendong's new requests. Other than the last one, the Duke of Loyalty's request for the title of king, all of his other requests had been approved. But because this request had not been approved, Jining was forced to remain kneeling on the ground. Rise. Seeing that Jining had been kneeling ever since she had returned, Zhu Qiyu couldn't bear to see her kneeling. Today's incident had nothing to do with Jining, and not only that, she had almost lost her life. Jining gave her thanks and stood up, but she did not leave. She continued to stand with her head lowered. Although she said nothing, her desire for an explanation was obvious. It's impossible to make him king. I'm not as stupid as some people who try to bribe people by making me king of a different surname. Give him a reply. In order to show our sincerity, we can think of other ways to compensate them. Zhu Qiyu's words were resolute and decisive, and there was no room for discussion. There was one more thing that Zhu Qiyu didn't say. For someone like Yang Chendong, even if you gave him the title of king, he wouldn't be able to use it. It would only strengthen his reputation. Therefore, he would never do such a thankless thing. Understanding the emperor's meaning, Jining nodded. Although he was indebted to Yang Chendong for not killing him today, everything he had now was bestowed upon him by the emperor in front of him. Based on this, he was very clear about his position. Very quickly, Jin Ying sent someone to convey the emperor's intentions. He tactfully rejected the request to be conferred the title of king, saying that the time was not right. Then, he proposed that in the future, the supply of provisions to the first city could be transported from Tianjing to the capital. From there, they could directly leave Juyong Pass and pass through Xin Manor and Tala City. Northern Ming would not set up any obstacles, and the mercenaries would only need to pay the required amount of money to pass through. Chapter 818. When Yang Chendong saw this news, he was in his study room. Standing beside him was the cautious director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. The previous director was Hu Meng. Later, because he had too many things to do, he completely put down this part-time job. Yang Sandy concentrated his power, and because of this, he did a lot of big things. Of course, it was inevitable that there were some mistakes. Don't look at how the words of the Security Bureau carried weight, and everyone was afraid of him. But when he stood beside Yang Chendong, he was very obedient and stood obediently. Unless the sixth young master asked, he didn't dare to say a word. Tell me, Yang Chendong asked casually as he threw the booklet Jining had sent onto the table. He leaned back in his chair and asked casually. There was only Yang San in the room. Of course, this question was asked to him. The director of the Security Bureau didn't answer immediately. He first thought about it before replying. At present, this is a very beneficial thing for both sides. We lack things and they lack money. This can be considered a win-win situation. Yang Chendong nodded gently. At present, this is the case. We should also seize this opportunity to transport more things from Qiqian City to the origin city. If one day, the two sides have a falling out, we won't have to worry about the problem of food. Of course, the Security Bureau must pay attention to this matter and closely monitor the movements of all sides in the capital. Once there is a change in the situation, immediately make countermeasures and preparations. Yes. Yang San nodded heavily. By the way, what do you plan to do over there? Yang Chendong's chin moved slightly toward the south. After the Security Bureau used a lot of manpower and material resources, a telegram soon came from the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty. Although there was not enough evidence to prove it, various clues had pointed to Chao Yin, the adopted son of the chief eunuch, Chao Jixiang. Yang San just reported this matter to the sixth young master. Young master, we have come up with a few plans to deal with the Southern Ming Empire's ministers. There is also a plan to deal with Chao Jixiang himself. This subordinate thinks that we can give it a try. Yang San carefully probed. As Yang Xie's power continued to expand, he found that he couldn't understand his young master anymore. Yang Qindong's mouth twitched slightly after hearing this. Give him a taste of his own medicine? It seems feasible, but the success rate is too low. They will definitely be more careful. If we do this, not only will we not be able to kill them, but the strength of the Security Bureau's elites will also be damaged. It's not appropriate. Listening to Yang Qindong's concern for the Security Bureau, Yang San said gratefully, "Thank you, young master, for your concern, but are we going to do nothing?" That's not a bad suggestion. Yang Qindong suddenly laughed. Yang San was stunned when he heard this. He just said it casually, but why did the sixth young master take it seriously? Yang Qindong seemed to see the hesitation on Yang San's face. He chuckled and said, "Sometimes, the greatest deterrent effect is to raise your hand but not drop it." Yang San quickly nodded in relief after hearing this sentence. "I understand. Young master wants to hang a knife over their heads, but not drop it. Let them live in fear and anxiety every day." "That's right." Yang Qindong finally laughed. If they really killed a few ministers, the Security Bureau could do it by paying a price. However, if they did that, it would be too easy for them. They might as well do nothing and make the other party suspicious. Even if they had to scare them half to death, it would be better. We don't have to kill people, but we can't do nothing. Otherwise, there will be no end to this. How about this? Send a telegram to my fourth brother and tell him to raise the prices of all the merchants from the southern Ming Empire by 5% as a warning. The smile on Yang Qindong's face faded, replaced by a trace of anger under his calm expression. Killing 9 of his soldiers and seriously injuring Yang Si, this matter couldn't be settled so easily. A 5% increase was enough to give the southern Ming merchants a headache. This way, not only could Crimson City earn more money, but it could also weaken the economic strength of the southern Ming Empire. It could be considered killing 2 birds with 1 stone. When Yang San heard the 5% increase in the price of goods, his heart couldn't help but tighten. This was a good thing, but wouldn't Lord Yang Si's safety be worried? However, before he could ask the question in his heart, Yang Qindong had already replied, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to my fourth brother. After all, the other party did something wrong this time, so they won't bother about this matter. Other than obediently admitting their mistakes, they have no other choice. If they really have the guts to make a move on my fourth brother, then all of their business channels into the southern Ming Empire will be cut off. At that time, the ones crying will only be themselves. If they did something wrong, they had to be prepared to accept the punishment. If they continued to make mistakes, then they would be seeking death." Yang Qindong could see this point. Presumably, Emperor Yingzong of the southern Ming Empire and the ministers under him could also see it clearly. Right now, the southern Ming Empire wasn't peaceful and its territory was shrinking. With Min Zhuangwang and the others eyeing the southwest covetously, if they were smart, they wouldn't provoke him. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to forcing the mercenaries to join hands with Zhu Huizhen. In the new year of 1453 AD, Yang Qindong spent the new year in the Yang family manor. Even though an assassination had just happened, the manor had already made preparations, so the New Year's atmosphere was still very lively. A party that had been prepared for a long time diluted the previous assassination and made many people smile again. 9 days later, on the 9th day of the first month of the new year, Yang Qindong and his group left the Yang family manor and went from the outskirts of the capital to the Juyong Pass. Along with them were the 200 teachers and students of the Yang Family Academy, as well as the 2 madams and 7th sister Yang duo. It could be said that after leaving, the Yang family manor was basically empty. Other than the housekeeper Yang Nung who stayed behind to take care of the business, only the servant Yang Lu stayed behind to handle the communication with the southern Ming Empire. Other than the 2 madams, Yang Qindong only brought along 7th sister Yang duo, who was already alone. The reason for this was because the other brothers and sisters had already settled down here. They couldn't leave as they wished like Yang duo. Yang Qindong tacitly agreed to the choice of his brothers and sisters. Perhaps if they stayed, Bai Ming would feel more at ease. As for whether or not they would act against his family when the relationship between the 2 sides broke down, he wasn't too worried. After all, these family members had lived in the capital for many years and had a certain amount of resources. Moreover, their father was Yang Rong, so they would probably have to think twice before acting. Moreover, With the help of Hu Xiao, Su Yozhen, and the others, the outcome wouldn't be too bad. When the time came, he would make arrangements in advance. Speaking of Su Yozhen, after that sudden conversation, he had finally adjusted his position. No matter how much he didn't think highly of the mercenary ship, he had already boarded it and could not back down. The only thing he could do was think about how to make this ship sail even further. Solving this problem could be considered a great harvest from this trip to the capital. Not long after Yang Qindong's group left the capital, another group quickly caught up. They first brushed shoulders with the Yang clan's group, and then they overtook them and took the lead. This group was led by Deng Chong, the eunuch of the Xin residence. During the negotiations, the two sides had already made it clear that Tulu City would be handed over to Northern Ming. This was a kind of goodwill that Yang Qindong expressed, and also an explanation to the people of the world. That was, the mercenaries were actually fighting for the Great Ming, fighting for the world. Only by doing this could the voices of the people gradually die down. Only by doing this could Zhu Qiyu stabilize the situation in the court, concentrate on developing himself, and provide a safe supply route for the mercenaries. Deng Chong's group slowly advanced forward. They had no choice but to move slowly. The Yang clan's group had brought far too many things, and there were also many women in the group. Thus, moving faster was an extravagant hope. Fortunately, after the new year, the weather was slowly warming up, and there were no more incidents of people getting frostbite on the road. With Deng Chong's group at the front, the road was green without any accidents. They passed through Juyong Pass and arrived at the Xin residence. 1 month later, they arrived at the Xin residence. Speaking of which, the Xin residence was Deng Chong's territory, and he had set up a banquet to entertain his guests. Yang Qindong once more met with the commander of the bureau, Shi Wanshan. Compared to the last time, Shi Wanshan's face was much more cordial this time. After all, when he received the guests last time, he still had to consider the opinions of his superiors. However, this time, he was receiving the orders of his superiors. The atmosphere between them was much more relaxed. In this meeting, Yang Qindong had brought up the problem of the Han people's lives and status. He had bluntly pointed out that the Han people should have been the strongest people in the world, and that all other races should serve the Han people. Anyone who made the lives of the people so miserable that they couldn't even solve the problem of food and clothing was a piece of trash that should be reprimanded by the people of the world. In response to Yang Qindong's words, Shi Wanshan could only smile apologetically and nod his head. He was only a general temporarily residing in the Xin residence. When it came to the lives of the people, there wasn't much he could do. But he could still see Yang Qindong's domineering aura from these words, and a thought flashed through his mind. It seemed that it was a blessing for the Han people for such a person to become the ruler of the Han people. Naturally, this thought only flashed through his mind. He was now a second-rank general in the Baiming army. Since he was paid by others, he had to work for them. This was a principle that hadn't changed since ancient times. Chapter 819. In Xin City, Yang Qindong only stayed for 2 days before leaving. Deng Chong and Shi Wanshan followed everyone to Tala City. In this city, Lu Zhua of the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment was waiting. When they saw Yang Qindong riding the white dragon horse in front of the team from afar, they excitedly greeted him. When they were still far away, they dismounted and saluted to show their respect and longing. Yang Qindong first returned a military salute, then looked at Shi Wanshan and Deng Chong and said, "Let me introduce you too. This is Lu Zhua, the commander of the 2nd Reinforced Mercenary Regiment. He is a fierce general." "Greetings, Commander Lu," Deng Chong and Shi Wanshan said with admiration. Lu Zhua naturally cupped his fist in return. After the two sides met, Yang Qindong said, "All right, this is Tala City. I'll hand it over to you now. In the future, the provisions our mercenaries need will be delivered through here. When the time comes, I hope the two of you can make things convenient for us. Don't make everyone unhappy. It wouldn't be good if we fought." Yang Qindong still had a smile on his face as he spoke, but when he reached the end, his expression had already become a little more serious. It was as if he was a completely different person. Shi Wanshan and Deng Chong were shocked when they heard these words, but they didn't show it on their faces. They just smiled and said, "No, no. We are all one family, one family. That's good." Even if you can see your friend off for 1,000 miles, there will always be a farewell. Let's part here. Yang Chendong laughed and squeezed the white dragon horse's belly with his legs. Immediately, the group of people passed through the deserted Tala city and went straight to Xiangshi city. Seeing Yang Chendong and the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment under the protection of Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment and the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment, Shi Wanshan looked at their backs and said with emotion, "Eunuch Deng, don't you think this is letting the tiger return to the mountain?" Silence. Deng Chong said nervously, as if someone had stepped on his tail. He looked around, and when he saw that no one was paying attention to them, he said softly, "General Shi, there are some things that we can't decide. We only need to complete the tasks assigned by the imperial court." Okay. Shi Wanshan pretended to be terrified and nodded repeatedly, but in his heart, he was certain of the statement just now. Although he had only met Yang Chendong twice, he had a feeling that Yang Chendong was extraordinary. If he was not restrained, once he became powerful, he would turn into a dragon as soon as he encountered the wind and clouds. As for Yang Chendong, he didn't know how Wanshi Mountain would evaluate him. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Instead, he was curious that it was Lu Zhua who came to greet him instead of Tiger's Mane. The telegram that he was coming back had been sent a few days ago. By right, Tiger's Mane should have come to welcome him personally. Could it be that there was a problem in the first city? With confusion, Yang Chendong asked Commander Lu Zhua who came to greet him.
Yes.
Lu Zhua nodded without hiding anything. In front of Yang Chendong, he didn't dare to lie. Not long after the new year, there was a sudden movement in the northwest. The Mongol army of the Gobi Desert suddenly sent troops to attack Wandu. The general guarding the city, Mu Ran, was defeated and retreated with his troops. Since then, that place became the territory of the Gobi Desert Mongol army. But that place was too close to our first city. It was only more than 200 miles away. Under the rapid movement of the cavalry, it would soon threaten our safety. Commander Tiger was worried that there would be problems in the future, so he took advantage of the fact that the other party had not yet gained a firm foothold and deployed troops to attack there. There was really no time to come to Tala City to pick up the 6th Young Master, so he arranged for me to come with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Take down Wandu? Yang Chendong listened to Lu Zhua's introduction and nodded first. If this was the case, Wandu would absolutely not be allowed to be touched by others. As the saying goes, how could one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? But the problem came again. Even if everyone understood this problem, what did the Gobi Desert Mongol army think? They knew that the mercenaries would not give up and would not allow them to touch the surrounding area of the first city. So why did they occupy that place? At this time, there was still snow on the grassland. It was not a good season for grazing. Even if it was, a small place like Wandu should not let the Gobi Desert Mongol army take such a big risk. Intuition suddenly told Yang Chendong that something was not right. Yang Chendong's expression changed, and he said to Beta Persei beside him, "Quick, send a telegram immediately to ask the first city if Tiger's Mane has sent troops. If not, ask them to postpone it." Seeing the 6th Young Master's expression change dramatically, Beta Persei quickly agreed and asked someone to send a telegram. Not long after, there was a reply to the telegram. Tiger's Mane had already set off 3 days ago and should have already fought with the Gobi Desert Mongol army. Speed up the march and get back to the first city as soon as possible. Yang Chendong, who heard the news, stopped talking and took the initiative to speed up. In view of Yang Chendong's performance, the others also began to speed up involuntarily. Only half a day later, a new telegram was sent to Yang Chendong. Sure enough, as he had guessed, something had happened. In the telegram, it said that the city of Wandu was a trap. The mercenaries were caught off guard and fell into the trap. The army suffered heavy losses. In the end, the Tatar cavalry led by Su He fought desperately to open up a bloody path. Now they had fled back to the first city, and the pursuers were close to the first city. There was a long list of losses at the bottom of the telegram. Looking at the introduction above, the Independent Division lost 4 battalions, and more than half of the Tatar Cavalry Regiment lost, more than 1,500 people. Of the 3 newly formed regiments of new recruits, 2 of them had lost around 4,000 men. The most miserable one was the Cavalry Regiment, which had a total of 3,200 men. In the end, less than 500 managed to escape. Among them, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Gao Danhua, had died in battle, while the commander of the 1st Battalion, Deng Yu, had been seriously injured. Looking at the bloody numbers on the telegram, the mercenaries lost 10,000 people in this battle and countless people were injured. Yang Chundong's face was terrifyingly gloomy at this moment. After 6 to 7 breaths, he suddenly raised his head and said fiercely, "Reinforce the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Leave 2 battalions to escort the madams back to the first city. The remaining battalion will pull the wooden carriage and bring Commander Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment to the first city with me." 10,000 people were killed in the battle and countless people were injured. This was the largest number of casualties since the mercenaries were established. At the same time, it could be considered a serious injury. However, what was even more terrifying was that the current origin city was already in danger. If the city was in danger, he was afraid that such a long time of effort would be in vain. This was definitely not what Yang Chendong wanted to see. After the order was given, the carriage was dismantled into pieces of wooden planks. On them sat the Cold Vanguard soldiers who held the 95 style. Fortunately, there was heavy snow on the road. With the help of the snow, it was not difficult to pull them up. At this moment, Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment had 1,300 people and Ma Xiangshan's reinforced battalion had 1,000 people. A total of 2,300 people flew toward the first city. At this time, in the first city, Tiger's mane looked haggard and his face was very ugly. He, who had been with the young master for the longest time, had always wanted to use his strength to prove himself and tell others that he did not rely on his qualifications to become the leader of a division. It could be said that this idea was good, but because he was too eager and too anxious, when he saw that Huan City, which was only 200 li away, had changed hands, he did not even wait for Yang Chendong to arrive before he began to mobilize his troops. Or rather, he did not want to wait for the return of the 6th young master. He just wanted to fight a beautiful battle to prove himself. However, he never expected that he would return in defeat. 10,000 soldiers died in battle, countless were injured, and the first city was in danger of being surrounded. The scouts at the front had already sent news that the Mongolian army in the desert had already arrived outside the city. They were less than 20 miles away from the greenhouse plantation. The generals below were all asking for instructions on what to do. Although the greenhouse plantation was only a mere 2,000 mu of land and was really nothing, it was arranged by the 6th young master to be planted. The vegetables that appeared in it once made the Mongolian people call the god of war the messenger of the immortal heaven. It was already a symbol, and the symbolic meaning was greater than the actual meaning. Such a place absolutely could not be lost. Otherwise, without waiting for the 6th young master to scold him, Tiger's mane would not be able to get over this hurdle in his heart. Men, bring out the 6 firearm battalions of the independent division. The others will guard the city. Even if I die on the battlefield, you are not allowed to open the city gate and take a step out of the first city. Tiger's mane made up his mind. Since the bad situation was caused by his poor command, then he had to personally stand up and solve this problem. Although he did not know if he could do it, at least he would use all his strength and even pay with his life. Yang Chendong was not here, so the commander of the army in the city was Tiger's mane. In this aspect, even Yu Mian could not be compared to him. He gave the order. Even if the officers below had different opinions, they could only endure it. There was strict discipline in the army. Once the commander gave a military order, even if it was wrong, they had to carry it out. Everything had to wait until the war was over. When the conclusion was made, everyone would have the freedom to express their own opinions. Leaving Commander Su He to guard the city, Tiger's mane led 6 battalions of firearmed soldiers out of the city. When he arrived at the greenhouse plantation, the enemy was already less than 5 miles away from him. Everyone, find a suitable formation. As long as the enemy dares to come, beat them all back. Tiger's mane put his hands on his waist and roared with a cold face at Vice Commander Xian Honghai and the 6 battalion commanders. 6 battalions, more than 2,000 soldiers armed with Type 81 rifles spread out in units, forming a huge temporary battlefield. The straight line of the battlefield reached a distance of several miles. The mercenaries set up a strict formation, and the enemy on the other side also stopped in their tracks. They did not immediately launch an attack. Instead, they set up camp, buried pots and cooked rice, and put on an unhurried appearance. Chapter 820. In the temporary tent, Swade sat at the head of the table. As the main commander of this battle, and the one who had sent the most troops, he had the right to sit in this position. However, the people sitting on the left and right of the Khan were even more surprising. Speaking of which, they were Yang Qindong's old friends, Aga Dorji and Fan Yuhai. Needless to say, Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalry had been defeated at the hands of Yang Qindong, and even his son, Hararuaku, had been lost. If General Suhi had not stepped in at the critical moment, he and his son would not have been able to escape. However, when they were completely safe and no one could threaten them, when the father and son were finally reunited, not only were they not grateful to Suhi, they even scolded him for being disloyal after drinking. This strange father and son even blamed Suhi for their defeat, believing that it was because he was greedy and afraid of death that he did not fulfill his responsibilities, which led to the final defeat. They had been brooding over this matter and had been looking for an opportunity to take revenge. It was at this time that they encountered another cavalry unit on the grassland. Both sides immediately got on their horses and carriages, as if they were going to fight. But in the end, they did not fight because the other party's general took the initiative to come out and say that he wanted to have a good talk with them. From afar, Agar Dorji noticed that the enemy had about 15,000 cavalry, which was about the same as his own army. But the difference was that he had brought some defeated soldiers and some men who had just been abducted from all over the grassland. Once the battle started, he wasn't completely sure how much combat strength they could exert. He wasn't even completely sure if they would turn around and run away when the battle started. With such an army, it was naturally best to avoid a fight if possible. Just like this, Agar Dorji met with the enemy General Fan Yuhai in front of the two armies. Through their conversation, he learned about the other party's background. Unexpectedly, the other party was also a defeated army that had escaped from the Jiaoji kingdom in the south of the Great Ming dynasty. Even the other party's cavalry was mostly captured and plundered along the way, which was very similar to his own. However, this was not the end of it. What was even more similar was that they had both been defeated by Yang Qindong. At this time, the two sides had found a common language, and for a time, they hit it off and regretted that they had not met earlier. What was even more rare was that this general called Fan Yuhai took the initiative to lower his status, stating that as long as they could defeat Yang Qindong's mercenaries, he was willing to respect Agar Dorji, which made the latter very happy. Originally, he thought that he had lost his main army, and he did not know how long it would take for him to rise again. Who would have thought that an opportunity appeared so soon? Overjoyed, he immediately agreed, and the two sides became allies, with Agar Dorji as the leader. Fan Yuhai was a famous general in Jiaoji, and had even brought a lot of trouble to Yang Qindong. However, because this person was very good at seeing the big picture, every time the situation was dangerous, he would always be the first to escape, which made Yang Qindong unable to catch him several times. After several exchanges, Fan Yuhai could also see that he was really not Yang Qindong's opponent. Although he was a proud person and usually did not put others in his eyes, he had to admit in his heart that whether it was the grasp of the battlefield or the fighting strength of the army, he was indeed inferior to Yang Qindong. Fan Yuhai could not help but feel like he was born in the East. Then, he made an important decision, and that was to leave the south and go to the north. He heard that the grasslands there were fertile and very suitable for raising horses. Moreover, the people there were more martial spirit because of the climate and environment. In his eyes, these conditions were undoubtedly very tempting. With his ability and wisdom, it should not be a problem for him to carve out a piece of the world and create the strongest cavalry in the world. With these thoughts in mind, Fan Yuhai set off. After passing through dense forests and mountains, they finally arrived at the grassland after suffering countless hardships. However, he soon realized that there was a huge difference between what he had heard and the actual situation. Who said that grasslands had to be fertile? Most of the places he saw were deserts, and the degree of desolation shocked him several times. It was said that the south was a barren land, but in Fan Yuhai's eyes, it was far inferior to this boundless desert. However, since he had already made his choice, Fan Yuhai certainly wouldn't turn back. He could only make up his mind and continue to walk forward. Along the way, he also encountered some small tribes. Of course, he would snatch whatever he could and take whatever he could. This allowed him to expand his original 5,000 elite soldiers to the current 15,000. The army grew stronger and finally walked out of the desert and into the grasslands. Then, he met Agar Dorji and learned more about this place. Fan Yuhai, who had always been known for his forbearance and intelligence, immediately decided to form an alliance with him and even respect him. He did not make such a decision because he was sincerely submitting to him. Instead, he wanted to use this opportunity to inquire about more things and understand more about the situation in this place. How could Agar Dorji know about this? Fan Yuhai being so obedient and tactful made him happy. At the same time, he answered almost all of Fan Yuhai's questions and explained the situation of this grassland without much effort. Fan Yuhai kept a smile on his face, but only the heavens knew how shocked he was in his heart. He lamented his bad luck to meet Yang Chendong here, and at the same time, he also lamented the speed at which Yang Chendong developed. Of course, there was also a voice in his heart that told him that this was his chance to turn the tables. Generally speaking, Fan Yuhai wanted to turn the tables not only because he had been defeated time and time again by Yang Chendong, but also because he wanted to get back at Yang Chendong. It was also because he realized that the forces here were intertwined with each other and were mainly cavalry. This way, they could greatly suppress the power of the muskets. Wasn't this an environment that could greatly reduce the strength of both sides exactly what he wanted? With the idea of turning the tables, Fan Yuhai began to think. He proposed the idea of allying with the Mongol tribes of the Gobi Desert to deal with the mercenaries together. At first, Agar Dorji did not agree with this idea. First, their relationship was not good. Back then, he had wanted to snatch Sud Khan's daughter to be his daughter-in-law. Second, his strength was not as good as Sud Khan's, and if they formed an alliance, it would be difficult for him to take the lead. This was something that Agar Dorji, who was used to having his entire army move at a single command, could not accept. Who was Fan Yuhai? He was the best at reading people's minds. He quickly found Agar Dorji's concerns and said that no matter who the alliance was, he was willing to respect them. At the same time, he also said that he was willing to persuade Sud Khan. Once they succeeded, they would join forces to attack the mercenaries. If they won, it would be easy to share the benefits. If they lost, it would be fine. Once the opportunity was right, they could swallow the Mongol tribes of the desert. There was a large amount of land there, and countless horses and sheep. It was enough for them to rise from the ashes. After some persuasion, Agar Dorji saw hope again and finally agreed. Fan Yuhai also followed the direction that Agar Dorji pointed to. After entering the Mongol tribes of the desert, he quickly convinced Sud Khan. It was also easy to find an excuse. He directly said that the strength of the mercenaries was a threat to the existence of all the grassland tribes. In addition, he allowed Agar Dorji's tribe to continue to grow, so he might as well call them over to watch over them. If there was a chance, he could directly devour the cavalry under his command. This was also a way to strengthen himself. After some consideration, Sud Khan agreed to this decision. Just as Fan Yuhai said, he did not want to see the mercenaries grow stronger and become a threat to himself. He also wanted to swallow Agar Dorji's tribe completely. In the end, he agreed. At this point, the alliance of the three forces was quickly formed under Fan Yuhai's guidance. The next step was to choose the location of the battle. After some investigation, Wandu was the most suitable place. The battle that Fan Yuhai had planned was about to begin. As expected, Tiger's mane was tricked and was heavily injured. The myth of the mercenaries being invincible was broken. In the tent, Sud Khan was sitting in the main seat, his face full of joy. In the Battle of Wandu City, he had beheaded 10,000 enemies and injured countless enemies. This was the humiliation of his previous two defeats. On the battlefield, they had obtained countless horses and sabers. He had seen those things, and they were indeed very sharp and tough. They were much stronger than the sabers in their hands. With such a harvest, Sud Khan was in a good mood. What made him even more excited was that this battle had broken the myth of the mercenaries being invincible. The originally low morale had been boosted, and some of the disloyal people in the tribe had become much more obedient. All of this was thanks to Fan Yuhai, who was sitting on the right. At this moment, he looked at Fan Yuhai with eyes full of admiration, so much so that an idea popped up in his mind. In order to rope this person in, could he keep him by his side through marriage? Fan Yuhai was 38 years old. From this point of view, he was older than Tuaya and could even barely be her father. However, since it was a marriage, he naturally would not consider such a problem. In order to deepen the relationship between the two sides, there were many cases in history of old men over 60 years old marrying teenage girls. As long as he could achieve his goal, this was not a problem. Sudkhan looked at Fan Yuhai fervently, and his voice became much warmer. General Fan, in your opinion, what should we do next? Do you even need to ask? Of course, we'll just fight. Halajuo, who was standing behind Agar Dorji, did not wait for others to say anything and took the initiative to speak. Chapter 8:21. For his son's rude behavior, Agar Dorji didn't think it was wrong at all. On the contrary, he nodded approvingly. My son is right. Now that we have defeated the mercenaries, the scouts have also sent news that the number of mercenaries in the beginning city is less than 10,000. This is the best time for us to follow up the victory. Haha, there are a lot of provisions and 70,000 people in the city. They are all wealth. As he spoke, Agar Dorji already had a greedy look on his face. It was exactly the same as Horror Dorji behind him. They were indeed father and son.
Yes.
Sudkhan also nodded after hearing this. He also had the same opinion. In his opinion, since they could severely injure more than 10,000 mercenaries before, then the 10,000 wounded people in the city were not a concern. Among the 3 people in the alliance, 2 of them nodded. Logically speaking, they had set the rules for this matter. But for some reason, Fan Yuhai didn't say anything, and the 2 of them didn't rush to give orders. Because Fan Yuhai didn't say anything, the atmosphere in the tent slowly became quiet. In the Battle of Wandu City, this person had proven his ability with practical actions. At this moment, everyone looked at him respectfully, waiting for his final decision. Among the crowd, only Horror Dorji had a look of impatience. In his opinion, Fan Yuhai was nothing special. He was just lucky and defeated the mercenaries once. This didn't prove that he was the best. However, even his father didn't say anything. Of course, he couldn't stand up and criticize Fan Yuhai. Time ticked by. Seeing that Fan Yuhai was still deep in thought, Sudur Khan couldn't hold it in any longer and asked, General Fan, is there something wrong? Yes, there is something wrong. Fan Yuhai finally raised his head. His face looked very solemn. What's wrong? Agar Dorji's mouth was quick. He leaned forward and looked impatient. If this person didn't say anything, he wouldn't give up. Report. At this moment, the voice of a scout suddenly came from outside the tent. Then, a man wearing a typical Mongolian costume entered the tent and knelt on the ground. He looked up and said to Sud Khan, Khan, the scout found an army in the southeast. There are about 2,000 people. Army? Have you found out who it is? Suda's confident smile disappeared in an instant. Could it be that a nearby tribe saw an opportunity and wanted to take a share of the pie? Without making the Sud wait for too long, the kneeling scout raised his head and said, reporting to the Khan, it's too far away to see clearly, but judging from the flag, it should be the flag of the war god. What? At this moment, not only did Sudur yell out in surprise, even Agadorji, who was sitting on the left, had a look of shock on his face. When ancient armies marched to war, they would each have their own flag, just like mercenaries. Most of them would use the 5-star flag, but wherever Yang Chendong appeared, unless they wanted to hide their identity, they would hang the 2 words war god to show their military might. Since the scouts said that the other party was using the flag of the war god, needless to say, it should be Yang Chendong who appeared. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow. When they heard the name Yang Chendong, it was normal for the 3 people who had lost to him to change their expressions. The reason why they dared to set a trap in Yundu City was because they knew that Yang Chendong had gone to Bai Ming's capital and was not in the origin city. Otherwise, it was unknown whether they would dare to fight with the mercenaries so openly. Sud Khan and Agadorji did not speak. Even Fan Yuhai, who was sitting on the right, did not speak. They all needed time to digest the news they had just received. The scouts on the grassland were fast, had good horsemanship, and were very vigilant. However, they had a fatal weakness, which was that they could only show off in their own territory. They were not strong enough to extend their tentacles to other places, such as Ming's capital. They did not have any basis for when Yang Chendong would come back. Everything was just guessing. But at such a critical time, the other party appeared and caught them off guard. After an unknown period of time, Sud Khan, who was sitting at the head of the table, finally could not help but say, "Everyone, what should we do next? Should we fight or not? Why should we not fight?" Hararuo did not wait for the others to express their opinions and was the first to speak. He was captured by Yang Chendong and regarded it as the greatest shame of his life. Even in his dreams, he was thinking about how to turn the tables. Now that they had finally grasped the advantage, if they retreated just because they heard a name, wouldn't it prove that they were afraid of the great Ming's loyal duke? If they did not even have the courage to fight, how could they talk about revenge? Shut up. Unlike before, when he allowed his son to interrupt, Agar Dorji finally scolded and then closed his mouth tightly. Back then, the 50,000 soldiers were defeated by Yang Chendong. This was indeed a shadow in his heart, a shadow that could not be erased and even made him afraid when he thought of it. Seeing Agar Dorji's performance, Sud Khan was very disappointed. Previously, he was so fearless and looked like he was going to attack the first city. Now, just a name scared him to this extent. If such an ally wanted to achieve great things, it could only be a joke. Since he didn't have much hope for Agar Dorj, Suede could only look at Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai was calm and collected, so his decisions were highly valued. Fan Yuhai was indeed deep in thought at this moment. His understanding of Yang Chendong was no less than Suda and the others. In fact, he knew more. Because of this, he was very clear about what kind of ability this person had. To be honest, he was not prepared to fight with Yang Chendong because he did not have the slightest confidence in winning. Sud Khan was still Agar Dorji. Although he also had a large number of soldiers, they were all cavalry. However, when facing Yang Chendong, would he be able to display his full strength? Sud Khan felt that it was impossible. It was not easy for him to have the courage to rush up and not run away. A real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Since he knows that he can't win, then he won't fight. In any case, the battle had just begun. If he wanted to fight, there would be many opportunities in the future. Let's retreat. The advantage of cavalry is in charging on the battlefield, not sieging and conquering. This time, the other party is prepared, so it will be difficult for us to gain any benefits. Since that's the case, it is better to wait for the other party to attack us. In that case, in a mobile battle, the power of their guns will be reduced to the minimum, which is the most beneficial for us. After thinking for a while, Fan Yuhai finally made a decision. After hearing this, he could even hear Sud Khan and Agar Dorji heaving a sigh of relief. Good. Since that's the case, I also agree to withdraw. Just as Agar Dorji finished speaking, Sud Khan nodded. Since that's the case, we will retreat to Wandu City first and look for an opportunity. The Mongol Alliance army, who had been eyeing the first city covetously and wanted to destroy the first city, retreated. When Yang Chendong arrived with Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment, he saw the other party retreating. Sixth young master, should we charge up? Ma Xiangshan's eyes were filled with killing intent as he asked excitedly. No need. Yang Chendong shook his head. Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment had just come into contact with warhorses, so their horsemanship training still needed to be strengthened. At this time, they gave up the advantage of guns and charged up. Even if they fought, they would not have much chance of winning. Once they forced the other party, they might be bitten back. This was not what he wanted to see. Right now, stabilizing the situation in the first city and restoring the fighting power of the soldiers was the right thing to do. As for the enemy in front of him, he would let them be proud for 2 days. The enemy retreated. Yang Chendong did not intend to chase after them. He brought the somewhat disappointed Xiao Feng's regiment and Ma Xiangshan's battalion back to the first city. At the city gate, in the cold weather, Tiger's Mane was kneeling naked with a few dried branches tied to his back. Behind him, there was a group of officers kneeling. Among them, Su He, Zhue Feng, and the others were also in the crowd. He. Seeing this scene, Yang Chendong could not help but laugh out loud. He actually played the game of carrying a bramble and asking for forgiveness. This made him feel like crying and laughing. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, actually laughed. This scene was seen by some officers, and they did not know what to do. After such a defeat, shouldn't the sixth young master be angry, or even very angry? What was the meaning of this smile? No one could see through Yang Chendong's meaning and thoughts. All they could do was to lower their heads even more. They just hoped that the sixth young master would not notice them. After all, losing a battle was not a glorious thing. If they were remembered at this time, wouldn't they be asking for trouble? Everyone knelt on the ground and did not say a word. It was not until Yang Chendong led the army to the city gate that he looked at the kneeling people that he finally opened his mouth and said, "What? Is this how you welcome me?" Facing Yang Chendong's questioning, no one dared to remain silent. Especially Tiger's Mane, who had the highest military position. He was the first to raise his head and said with a pained expression, "Young master, we did something wrong. Please punish me." All right, all right. Victory and defeat are common in war. After all, we didn't lose the city. Everyone, get up. Yang Chendong had a smile on his face. There was no trace of anger. This extremely abnormal scene made many of the officers who were originally worried feel much more at ease. That's right. This time, they had lost the battle, but everyone had put in a lot of effort. They could only blame the enemy for being too cunning. Chapter 822. Under Yang Chendong's signal, Beta Persei also found a military coat and put it on Tiger's Mane. Then, everyone followed the sixth young master into the city. Although they had only been away for 3 months, the atmosphere in the city had changed. It was not as noisy as before. Even the number of people walking on the streets seemed to have decreased a lot. This was the reaction and result after a defeat. Yang Chendong saw this, but he did not say a word. The team arrived at the Yang mansion. After Xiao Feng's group was settled in the barracks, Tiger's Mane, Windchaser, and Su He all knelt on the ground. They were smart enough to know that this was the time for the sixth young master to punish them. Yang Chendong did not reprimand them in front of so many people because he wanted to save them face. After all, they were all leaders. If they were scolded too harshly in front of their subordinates, it would not be beneficial for them to lead and command troops in the future. Since there were no outsiders, Yang Chendong casually found a chair and sat down. He glanced at the 3 people kneeling on the ground and said, "Tell me, what's going on?" Although he knew from the telegram that they were defeated, it did not explain what had happened. Without understanding, there was no right to speak. Yang Chendong wanted to know how the other party defeated Tiger's Mane and the others. After all conspiracies and tricks depended on one's own strength in the end. It was like a 3-year-old child. No matter how good he was at scheming, it would be difficult for him to defeat a 20-year-old strong man. "It's like this," Tiger's Mane said. Su He and Windchaser added on. The process of the matter was clearly shown in front of Yang Chendong. The Mongols of Gobi Desert suddenly launched a large-scale attack on Wandu. To the outside world, the reason was that they had betrayed the Mongols of Gobi Desert. They were here to seek revenge. Mu Run, the general of Yundu, who had a guilty conscience and whose military strength was far inferior to the other side, wisely chose to leave and give up the city. After the news spread to the beginning city, Tiger's Man gathered the officers for a meeting. After discussion, they finally decided to take down Wandu City to reduce the threat that could threaten their existence at any time. After the decision was made, the corresponding military plan was carried out. The Independent Division was the main offensive force. Vice Division Commander Xin Hong Hai led 8 battalions and the 1st New Recruit Regiment to carry out the mission. On the left, the 1st Cavalry Regiment was the main offensive force. Regiment Commander Zhue Feng led the 1st New Recruit Regiment and the 2nd New Recruit Regiment followed. On the right, the Tatar Cavalry Regiment was the main offensive force. Regiment Commander Su He led the 3rd New Recruit Regiment followed. A total of 16,000 people launched a fierce attack on the city. Division Commander Tiger's Man would lead the remaining 8 battalions of the Independent Division, as well as Su Yunqing's Reconnaissance Battalion and Logistics Battalion to stay behind. They would be in charge of the security of the city and the supply of the army. Even 3 new regiments were sent out. This in itself was enough to explain the problem. This was originally a training operation. It was to bring the new recruits to experience the atmosphere of the battlefield so that they could adapt to this environment faster and better. It was just a Wandu city, facing the Mongol troops of the Gobi Desert who had been defeated by them again and again. No one put them in their eyes. And the facts also proved that it didn't take long to take down Wandu city. The army just charged and scared the enemy away and occupied the city. And all the changes began to happen from this moment. Just as the army occupied Wandu city and was cheering for victory, suddenly, one explosion after another sounded in the city, followed by flames that soared high into the sky. The unprepared mercenaries were hit head-on. The explosion and flames devoured their lives and disrupted their battle formation. After the event, the number of soldiers who were burned to death by the explosion was close to 5,000. Other than that, there were at least 2,000 soldiers who were injured or burned. The chaos didn't end there. After the explosion and flames, countless Mongol cavalry appeared from all around Wandu city. They fired their bows and charged forward like a tornado in the desert. Without any preparation, the soldiers didn't know their generals, and the generals didn't know their soldiers. In the chaotic battlefield, facing the sudden appearance of the Mongol cavalry, the mercenaries panicked. On the battlefield, there was a one-sided situation, and a one-sided massacre had begun. At this point, Tiger's Mane raised his head and looked at the silent Yang Chendong and said, "The generals are still very brave." Many of the soldiers who were burned took the initiative to take up the role of providing cover. For example, Gao Danhua, the 2nd Battalion commander of the 1st Cavalry Reinforced Regiment, was in the sea of flames. More than 40% of his body was burned, but he still raised his sword and led the soldiers to charge at the enemy. In the end, he died on the battlefield. In this battle, we lost 10,000 soldiers and more than 4,000 were injured. Young master, it's all my fault. I made a mistake in my command. Please punish me. At the end of his speech, Tiger's Mane knocked his head on the ground again and again. Soon, his forehead started to bleed, drop by drop. Enough. In the dull hall, Yang Chendong's roar finally came out. You are not sorry to me, but to the soldiers who died on the battlefield. Do you know how many families their deaths brought pain that can't be erased for a lifetime? With this roar, Tiger's Mane didn't dare to make a sound. He just lowered his head and cried. Wind-chasing Wolf and Su He, who were kneeling on the side, also looked very gloomy. This time, Hu Mang, who was the commander of the army, was mainly responsible. But as his deputy, he didn't stop it and didn't find the problem. He was also guilty. The room became quiet again. After Yang Chendong shouted, his chest kept rising and falling. It was obvious that he was really angry. Beta Persei saw all of this and was also very worried. He stepped forward and whispered, Young master, take care of your body. It's bad for your body to be angry. Sigh. Yang Chendong sighed and then waved his hand. Forget it. This time, you are indeed responsible. But where did the fire come from? How did the Mongolian tribe in the north set you on fire? This is the main reason. Let me ask you, have you found out the reason? No. Tiger's Mane raised his head again, but the shame on his face was even heavier. This result seemed to be within Yang Chendong's expectations. He could also understand. After losing to such an extent, everyone was only thinking about how to defend the city. How could they have time to think about other things? He didn't say anything about it and just summed up this defeat. The 3 of you are senior officers. Each of you will be recorded with a major demerit and your salary will be deducted for a year. If you commit the same mistake again, you will be removed from the military. Do you have any objections? No. Tiger's Mane and the other 2 couldn't help but tremble when they heard this. That was a major demerit. This was a very serious warning. According to the rules, if they committed the same mistake again within a year, they would have no chance to be in the military. However, compared to the soldiers who died, this result was not so hard to accept. All right, I'll say it again. There is no such thing as a permanent victory in war. Since we lost today, we need to learn from our experience and not make the same mistake again. Now, let's think about how to raise the morale of the soldiers. Just now, you said that everyone's performance in the battle was not bad. Do you have any examples? Yang Chendong had already punished them. The dead could not be brought back to life. He had to continue his career. He couldn't just stop because of a defeat. Yes, there is. Tiger's mane raised his head and immediately reported what he heard and understood. A new idea began to form in Yang Chendong's mind with these reports. On the third day after Yang Chendong entered the origin city, his family also came to the origin city. Before they came, they had heard a lot about this city, but everything was just in their imagination. However, when they really entered this place, all kinds of exclamations naturally came out from their mouths. The origin city was naturally much worse than the capital of Ming. It was even a little worse than the old city like Xian Mansion. However, after walking through the snow and seeing the vast white grassland, it was very difficult to see such a big city here. After only 2 days, the number of people on the streets of the city had begun to increase. The messenger of longevity heaven had returned. The god of war had returned. This was like a shot in the arm for everyone, allowing the people in the city to see hope again. If Yang Chendong's return was a kind of spiritual stimulation, then the compensation for the soldier's death that was distributed to the people in the past 2 days was real. They could see and feel the benefits. Under Yang Chendong's order, the treasury in the city was opened. More than half of the accumulated money was taken out to pay the families and relatives of the soldiers who died in the battle. When the real money was openly sent to the families of the Mongolian people by the mercenaries, the shock naturally appeared. The Mongolians were said to be a race on horseback because they had been in contact with the idea of the weak being prey to the strong since they were young. They paid attention to the strong being respected. The strong enjoyed everything and got everything. As for the weak, or even the dead, no matter how powerful they were when they were alive, they were just a pile of white grain after death. Just like Genghis Khan, he lived at the bottom for several years after his father's death. The strong enjoyed everything, and the dead turned into ashes. This seemed to have become an iron law on the grassland. But now, Yang Chendong had broken all the rules. The families of the dead soldiers received generous compensation in gold and silver. Although this couldn't bring the dead back to life, and couldn't make some people forget the joy of losing their loved ones, it was still better than not receiving anything. Especially when they received a lot. The dead soldiers each received at least 50 taels of compensation. Those who were officers would receive even more. Chapter 8:23. For this alone, the beginning city had paid 800,000 taels of silver. Such a huge figure was not something that other forces could afford. This move quickly stabilized the situation in the city, and the people in the city quickly felt grateful. Many people knelt down and kowtowed in the direction of the young residents in the city the moment they received the silver. The families of all the soldiers who had died received pensions. The complaints in the city disappeared, and there was a smile on people's faces. However, this was not all of Yang Chendong's means. Next, he announced that the awards ceremony for the soldiers who had made meritorious contributions would be held in 3 days. At that time, the soldiers who had made meritorious contributions in this battle would be promoted in official positions and actual material rewards. As soon as the news came out, the people in the city were in an uproar. Didn't they lose the battle? How could there be rewards? It seemed that the scale was not small. What on earth was going on? Those who couldn't figure it out began to look forward to the so-called awards ceremony that would be held 3 days later. Scattering gold and silver was Yang Chendong's contingency measure after he returned to the beginning city. Money might not be able to buy sincerity, but it could stabilize people's hearts and stimulate them. If it was supplemented by great benefits, it would definitely have an unimaginable effect. During these 3 days, Yang Chendong did not accompany his wives. He only instructed the teachers and students of the Yang Family Academy to walk around the city and take a look. He spent all his time on stabilizing the morale of the army. For example, he went to patrol the barracks, chatted with the soldiers to understand their psychological thoughts and movements, went to the hospital to visit the soldiers who were injured because of the battle, went to the homes of the people to comfort the families of the martyrs who had died, and so on. These actions allowed Yang Chendong to quickly gain the morale of the army and the public. The uneasiness in the city because of the defeat was almost suppressed by him alone. In the blink of an eye, the third day arrived. Early in the morning, the largest square in the beginning city, was surging with people. Under the strict protection of the army, the awards ceremony began. Just like before, the two carriages of shining silver tails were pushed to the center of the square. Yang Chendong once again put on his commander's uniform and walked up to the podium. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, names were read out one by one from his mouth. The young Mongolian men in brand-new military uniforms stepped onto the podium and personally received the War Hero medals from Yang Chendong, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Xiao Feng, Windchaser, Lu Zhua, Su He, and Xian Honghai. They also received the military rank that only military officers could wear. They also received the heavy silver tray that made them bend down. In front of Yang Chendong, the young Mongolian man, Ba Tu, stood. In this battle, he joined the battle as a recruit. In the raging fire, he was not only not afraid, but also fought bravely with the cavalry of Ma Bei. He killed 2 enemies and rescued the injured battalion commander of the 1st Battalion, Deng Yu, at the critical moment. It could be said that he was one of the few people who performed very well on the battlefield. When Batu's deeds were reported to Yang Chendong, he felt that there was something to be done in this matter. Finally, under his support and decision, he became a typical example among the recruits and stood on the podium of the award ceremony. Yang Chendong personally hung a 2nd-level War Hero medal on his chest. At the same time, he also gave him a 2nd lieutenant's military rank with 1 bar and 500 taels of silver as a substantial reward. Holding the tray in his hand, Batu's face was red, and his face was full of smiles. Do well, I am optimistic about you. Like many leaders in later generations, Yang Chendong patted Batu's shoulder to encourage him. It was these 7 words that made Batu extremely excited. Until he walked past Yang Chendong and came to the podium that was equipped with loudspeakers and batteries, his face was still red and excited. Hello everyone. My name is Batu. I am a native Mongolian. I grew up in a happy family. My father, mother, and sister accompanied me as I grew up. At that time, the sky was so blue and the water was so fertile. Even when it snowed in winter, the snowflakes were so pure and white. But all this happiness was disrupted by a sudden incident. That day, Ferwala bandits came to my house, my father. Batu was still talking about his strength on the podium. Yang Chendong and the others had already taken their seats in the 1st row of the podium. Sitting on his right was Beta Persei. Yang Chendong had already read the investigation about Batu's day. He knew that he would be Beta Persei's future brother-in-law, so he took this opportunity to give him a chance. Now, it seemed that this person's performance was not bad. Seeing Beta Persei looking at him, Yang Chendong said softly, "Not bad, he did very well. Thank you, young master, for your praise and for giving him this opportunity." Beta Persei was also very excited. Then he looked at Batu, who was still on the podium, with a gratified expression. Although he and Kikij spent 2 days and 2 nights teaching him, it was undeniable that what he said was the truth, and it was also the most infectious for other Mongolians with similar experiences. To be able to achieve this effect, everything was enough. Beta Persei was not the only one who spoke. 2 other Mongolian soldiers who had made contributions in this battle also spoke. Their experiences were different, but the goal of the topic was the same. It was about the benefits of joining the mercenary army and how their lives had changed after joining the army and what kind of tempering their lives had been through. Hearing this, the people in the city who came to participate in this award ceremony were either excited or had tears in their eyes, or this was a successful conference. After all the processes were completed, the last item of the conference was announced by Tiger's man. Just before the end of the conference, he announced the recruitment of new soldiers in the city, and it immediately received strong support from the people who attended the conference. Previously, Yang Chendong did not advocate the recruitment of soldiers because the resources in the city were limited. It was very expensive to raise an army, not to mention that the treatment of the mercenary army was so good. But in this battle, the losses were too great, so there were a lot of vacancies. Thus, there was a need to recruit soldiers. At the same time, this was also a way to tie everyone's interests together. Think about it. When every family had a mercenary recruit, wouldn't everyone's safety be tied together? It was really a case of, if one's glory is glory, then one's glory is glory, and if one's loss is also loss. A total of 1 to 200,000 taels of silver had been spent, and dozens of soldiers had been promoted to platoon leaders and deputy platoon leaders. This was the best example. Under the double temptation of money and glory, the new recruits' registration area in the city was immediately overcrowded. In the 4 months that Yang Chendong was not around, the total population of the beginning city had increased from the original 50,000 people to nearly 70,000 people. Among them, there were a total of 15,000 young men. However, it was still very easy to recruit 6,000 new soldiers from these people. As for the other sources of soldiers that were lacking, they would have to think about the logistics team. The logistics team was not only responsible for managing logistics. There were 2 very special units. One was the construction team, and the other was the prisoner camp. Their population alone had exceeded 10,000 people. They were all made up of prisoners who were captured in the war. The former was the reserve troops of the mercenary army that had surrendered, while the latter had not completed the transformation and had not completely surrendered. Choose 6,000 people from the construction team to reorganize into the army. Choose another 6,000 people from the prisoner camp to enter the construction team and continue the transformation. Tell them that as long as they perform well, they may be able to become a member of the mercenary army. If they don't perform well, they will work for the rest of their lives. Since Yang Chendong had spoken as the nominal leader of the logistics team, he took over this task and began to adjust. It had only been a few days since they returned to the beginning city, and the losses of the army from the previous battle had been replenished. Perhaps their combat power was not as strong as the previous mercenary veterans, but at least in terms of numbers, they had reached the same level as before. Even in terms of morale, there was not much difference. Seize the time to train. Let the new veterans get used to each other as soon as possible and meet the requirements of being able to go to the battlefield. After leaving these words to Tiger's Mane and the others, Yang Chendong left the barracks outside the city and returned to the Yang Mansion in the city. In the Yang Mansion, the director of the beginning City Security Bureau, Feng Liang, and the captain of the Langus Special Forces, Tai Hu, had been waiting here for a long time. As soon as they saw Yang Chendong coming back, the aura of the 2 people who were originally straight changed. They restrained their sharpness and lowered their noble heads. "You guys are here. Tell me, how is the investigation going?" Yang Chendong nodded to the 2 of them. Then, accompanied by his servant, Yang Si, he entered the side hall and sat down in front of the chair. Yang Si's body was very strong. He seemed to be seriously injured that day, but it was caused by excessive bleeding. Once he woke up after the blood transfusion, he quickly became lively again. Although his injuries were not completely healed, as long as he did not fight with the enemy for too long, there would not be any problems. After this incident, Yang Si admired Yang Chendong even more. He already knew that at the most critical moment, it was the young master who had transfused his blood to him. This was an extremely touching thing. The ancients were not like the modern people. They had received less education, and they knew even less about some things. In the eyes of many of them, blood was something that could save one's life. How could they casually give it to others? But the young master had done this. How noble was he? How lowly was he? Was it worth it for the young master to do this? He still remembered that after waking up, Yang Si was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He thought that it was his fault that the young master had transfused his blood to him. Later on, the doctor, Yuan Heping, explained a lot of things to him and said that human blood could be produced by themselves. As long as he did not bleed excessively, he could slowly recover. But from then on, he became even more loyal to Yang Chendong. Chapter 824. Yang Si stood beside Yang Chendong, less than 2 meters away. This was to ensure that no matter what danger occurred, he could step forward at the first moment and use his body as a meat shield to protect the young master's safety. Yang Chendong sat down, and his eyes fell on Feng Liang and Tai Hu. As soon as he returned to the first city, he sent these 2 people out with only one purpose, to inquire about the actual situation of Wandu City and why the fire suddenly broke out in this battle. The explosion was easy to understand. Gunpowder could do it, and this kind of thing was not an exclusive secret. Ming knew it, Naming knew it, and the Mongolian tribe naturally knew it. However, it was winter now, and there was snow everywhere. Yang Chendong could not figure out how the fire started. Feng Liang took the lead in reporting, "Sixth young master, we spent money to bribe a middle-level Mongolian tribe member and know these names, Agar Dorji and Fan Yuhai. In the last battle, our opponents were not only the Mongolian tribe of Ma Bei, but also these two enemies. However, the middle-level Mongolian tribe member did not know the exact number of their troops. He still needs time to investigate." After saying this, Feng Liang lowered his head. In this battle, the intelligence department did not follow up. Speaking of which, the Security Bureau was also responsible for the defeat. Originally, they thought that they could make up for their mistakes. However, it was obvious that Fan Yuhai had long been prepared for this. He actually said that he had 40,000 troops. At least, that was what the middle-level Mongolian man who was bribed said. Feng Liang was not a fool. Naturally, he would not believe it easily, let alone report this result. Therefore, he would rather be criticized than to find out the truth. When he heard the name Agar Dorji, especially Fan Yuhai, Yang Chendong, who was originally sitting there, could not help but frown. He had never thought that these people would mingle together. He knew that Agar Dorji wanted his son to marry Princess Tuya and wanted to form a marriage alliance with the Mongol tribe in the north of the desert. Logically speaking, the two sides should be enemies. But now, in order to deal with him, they had joined forces. It had to be said that there were no eternal enemies in this world, only eternal benefits. As for Fan Yuhai, this person was also an old enemy and belonged to the slippery kind. He did not expect that after fighting in the south, they would now meet in the north. It was really like the old saying, "Enemies do not meet." A thought flashed through his mind. He remembered these two people. Since he didn't know their actual situation, he shouldn't act rashly for the time being. He turned his gaze to Taihu. He had asked this person to investigate how the fire had started. "Sixth young master, Taihu is incompetent. We have not gotten the results yet, but it should be soon. We have more or less figured out the terrain of Wandu. Next, we only need an opportunity to figure out the cause." Taihu, who had his head lowered, had a guilty look on his face. He always boasted in front of Yang Chendong. In his words, there was nothing in the world that their Wolf Fong special forces could not do. But now, the task had been handed in to him for 4 days, but there was still no clear result. He was ashamed. "Well, then I will give you a few more days. I don't want to drag this matter on for too long. You can do as you see fit." Yang Chendong did not blame them. The current Wandu was not the same as before. There were many Mongolian cavalry stationed there. It was not easy to inquire about information there without being discovered, but he had confidence in the Security Bureau and Wolfang. These were two incomparably powerful fists. As long as there was enough time, they would definitely send back the results. Feng Liang and Taihu left. Just from the way the two of them went out, it was obvious that they were holding back a lot of energy. It was conceivable that the next time they came to report, there would definitely be a result. Just as the two of them left, 3 women came in hand. They were the second Madame Qiao Yin, the fourth Madame Lady Xiang, and the 7th Sister Yang Duo. It had been 3 days since they came to the first city. They had gradually become accustomed to the environment here, especially the greenhouse plantation outside the city. It was their favorite place to go. Not only was there green grass that was different from the winter snow, but the vegetables there were also the freshest. They were picked and made into delicious food. The taste was very good. The 3 of them came hand in hand this time to invite Yang Chendong to the greenhouse plantation. It was not that they were insensible. On the contrary, they wanted to use this method to persuade Yang Chendong to rest more. Otherwise, no matter how good his body was, he would still be exhausted. The 3 women's hospitality was difficult to decline. The main reason was that Yang Chendong had not spent much time with them. He owed them too much. In the face of such a request, he naturally could not refuse. He immediately said, "Then, I won't do anything today. I will accompany you to pick vegetables. We will make delicious food." Ha ha ha. Yang Chendong treated it as a hands-off shopkeeper, but the others were not so lucky. For example, the city lord, Yu Mian, was currently taking Wang Si, Yuan Heping, and the other teachers and students of the Yang Family Academy to tour the city and choose the location to build the school. Most of the first batch of students of the Yang Family Academy were now working in the first university of Red City. Every year, many outstanding students would graduate from there to fill the various positions that appeared in the expanding Yangtze. Building the second university in the first city was something that young Chunjiang approved after careful consideration. With the idea of cultivating backup forces, he thought that there should also be a university in the first city. Needless to say, the principal of the second university must be Wang Si. He asked Yu Mian to accompany him to choose an address. Once winter was completely over and it was time to break ground, a university would rise from the ground. Only when he came to the first city did Wang Si see young Qindong's great talent and great vision. How was this still a city? This was clearly the future prototype of a country. He remembered that before leaving the capital, his grandfather had told him that the strength of the Duke of Loyalty should be far stronger than what outsiders saw. At that time, he did not believe it, but now, the facts were in front of him, and he had no choice but to believe it. It was precisely because of this that Wang Si did not have any doubts. On the contrary, he was very excited. He knew that he had encountered a good era and an opportunity to let go of his hands and feet. Compared to the Ming dynasty that was already dull, decadent, tyrannical, and even filled with internal strife, everything here was so clear and attractive. The Ming dynasty advocated Confucianism and paid attention to the path of the sage. It seemed that as long as one could write a good essay, one could become a pillar of the country. In the past, Wang Si had also thought this way, and he had even done so. However, ever since he came into contact with the Yang family, which could be called a new learning, his attitude had completely changed. Originally, the knowledge in the world was not only limited to Confucianism. There were many more things that were worth learning and exploring. Knowledge was endless, and there was no end to learning. Ever since he fell in love with Yang Shui, Wang Si had completely thrown himself into it, and what appeared in front of him was another world. Now that he was able to leave the capital and come to the origin city, it was equivalent to providing the Yang family with a strong enough soil. In addition, Yang Qindong rarely used people based on seniority. He had always used talents in a different way, and this made Wang Si even more excited. He knew that the greatest opportunity in his life had come. As long as he could seize it, he would become someone like his grandfather, or even someone more powerful than his grandfather. For this goal, Wang Si worked hard and did his best. The first step was to choose the location of the school. Both Yu Mian and Wang Si were serious people. When they came together, they were naturally very careful in choosing the location of the school. Fortunately, there were too many open spaces in the origin city, and there were too many places to choose from. After just one day, the new location of the school was decided. Then, it was reported to Yang Qindong for approval. What kind of courses would be held in the new school, and who would be the preacher were the problems that the future principal, Wang Si, would have to consider after all. Finally, there was a chance to show off their skills. This was a good thing for most of the students of the Yang Family Academy. In the future, they would not be confined by various rules. They only needed to follow their own thoughts and work hard to complete it step by step. If their performance was outstanding, there should be no problem with a golden path for them to walk on. One had to know that their teacher was loyal and courageous. With this, how could the students be afraid that they would not have a future? Of course, not every student was so excited. Just like Junko, one of the few female students, she was very conflicted at this moment. She left Biming with the team. Along the way, she saw the different customs and environment of the Great Ming Dynasty. It let her know how vast the real Great Ming Dynasty was. It also let her know that her country was so small and weak. As soon as she arrived at the origin city, a new feeling once again refreshed her worldview and outlook on life. Although many of the people living here were not rich, their faces were full of happiness from the bottom of their hearts. Although some of them had just lost their loved ones because of the defeat, this did not break them down. On the contrary, many people thought that the reason why they lost the battle was because there was no god of war to command the battle. Now that the god of war had returned, they would still restore their history of winning every battle. Their future life would only be better. This kind of yearning for the future, as well as a positive and optimistic attitude, was very infectious even when Junko walked on the street. In contrast, her country, including her father and those ministers, only knew how to fight for fame and fortune in a small place. But in fact, how many people really cared about the lives of the people? Chapter 825. Everyone else was seeking change, and they were all getting better and better with each passing day. Where should Japan go from here? As a member of the royal family and a princess, Junko had to have some ideas. But at the same time, a choice was placed in front of her. Should she return to Japan now, or stay here to learn more? Walking out of the capital of Ming, Junko knew that she was safe. Here, Yangchendong was the sky and the earth. As long as there was no order from him, no one would restrict her actions. That was to say, from the moment she stepped into the city, she had gained complete freedom and the right to choose. If she stayed, she should be able to learn more. She could see how the academy developed from nothing, how it grew, and how it combined what she learned with reality to benefit the country and the people. It could be said that this was a very good learning process. Once he learned it, one day when he returned to Japan, if he learned from it, he should be able to shake Japan, bring a new wind there, and strengthen himself. But would reality give her so much time? Junko asked Yangchendong and knew that the advanced artillery that her father wanted had been passed to Japan. That was to say, the battle between the royal family and the general might start at any time. If that was the case, how could she still have the heart to stay here? She wanted to go back and help her father. Junko was troubled by whether to leave or stay for several days. But in the end, the honor of the country prevailed over everything. She finally made the decision to leave. As for whether she would lose the best opportunity to learn after doing so, she really couldn't care less. Junko came to the Yang mansion and said goodbye to Yangchendong. She was received in the study. The study was an important place in the Yang mansion. Usually, even the two madams were not allowed to come here without permission. Just like when they were in the Yang manor, this was already an iron law. Generally, those who could be received in the study were important people. Junko was surprised to see Yangchendong here. But thinking that she was going to leave, she didn't have so many thoughts in her heart. Yangchendong was sitting at the desk, writing something. Feeling Junko's entry, he said without raising his head, "Wait a little longer. It will be done soon." Yes. Over the past 2 years, Junko had already gotten used to Yangchendong's orders. She involuntarily complied and sat down on the chair placed in front of her. Then, she sized up the study room. This was the first time she had entered this place. She saw many books on the bookshelves. Just by looking at the names, she could tell that many of them were not available outside. This could be seen from the gorgeous book covers. Yangchendong didn't have to wait for long. He stopped writing, stretched, and turned to look at Junko. For a moment, their eyes met. Today, Junko seemed to have dressed up and put on some light makeup. Her skin looked very clean, and her face was also very clean. Coupled with her delicate facial features, she gave people a very comfortable and pleasant feeling. "Have you made your decision?" His eyes only stayed on Junko's face for a moment, then moved to her eyes and asked.
Yes.
Facing such a gaze, even a somewhat burning one, Junko didn't know why she was a little nervous. She just answered and quickly lowered her head. Yangchendong said generously, "If you want to leave, then leave. This is my promise to you. You don't have to be so evasive. You don't owe me anything. By the way, I just wrote something. If you really want to go back to Japan and build an academy, it may be of help." He actually wrote something for me? Doesn't that mean he has me in his heart? At this moment, Junko's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. It would be a lie to say that she didn't have any feelings for Yangchendong. Just like how beauties loved heroes, this seemed to have become a common problem. No matter how strong a woman's heart was, she would always hope to find a stronger man to rely on and rely on. Not to mention that Yangchendong was young and handsome, giving people the feeling that he was omnipotent. How many girls could resist such a man? Once upon a time, Junko's heart was filled with Yangchendong's figure. She even made up her mind that as long as Yangchendong asked, she would stay and accompany him forever. Even though she knew that Yangchendong already had 5 wives, she still took the initiative to ignore this layer. Even if she was a country's princess and couldn't marry as a concubine, she still threw these fetters aside. Unfortunately, from the beginning to the end, Yangchendong didn't take the initiative to ask her to stay. At most, he gave her a choice. This feeling finally made Junko give up the beautiful dream in her heart. She decided to leave. But now, when Yangchendong's somewhat burning eyes looked at her, she found that her determination was still not enough. Her heart couldn't help but have other thoughts. Thank you. After a long time, Junko finally opened her mouth. At this time, after a struggle in her heart, she finally made the decision to leave here. Compared with her feelings as a princess of Japan, she was more worried about her father's foundation. This might be a kind of mission of being born in the imperial family. You're welcome. You're my student. Yang Chendong smiled. He might not have noticed the change in Junko, or he might have noticed it, but he didn't want to say anything about it. Yes, I'm his student. Junko suddenly smiled at this moment, then raised her head and looked at Yang Chendong, revealing a bright smile. Thank you for taking care of me for so long. If possible, on behalf of my father, I welcome you to Japan. At that time, I'm willing to be your guide. Definitely. Yang Chendong smiled. He had to go to Japan, but when that day came, he was afraid that not many people would sincerely welcome him. By the way, a battalion of soldiers will go out of the city the day after tomorrow. They will go to the sea town in the newer Gandusi area to receive the goods shipped from the sea. You can leave with them. Those soldiers will protect your safety along the way. Thank you. After thanking him again, Junko didn't know why, but her heart seemed to be empty, as if something had dissipated. This made Junko, who was holding a stack of documents, walk out of the Yang mansion with a stunned expression on her face. Until she stepped out of the Yang mansion's gate, tears flowed down her face. She thought that maybe she would never see him again in the future. But what she didn't know was that they would meet again soon. It was just that at that time, it would be in a different way. Yang Chendong didn't show any discomfort with Junko's departure. This woman was very beautiful and smart. For a certain period of time, she really touched his heart, and he even had the idea of marrying her as a concubine. But his own ideals and mission made him not say those words. Even though he clearly knew that even if he asked her to stay now, there was still a high chance of success, he still didn't do that. She has her own mission after all. I just hope that she can be safe. When we meet again one day, maybe everything will come naturally. After sighing in his heart, Yang Chendong shook his head and temporarily put Junko's matter aside to consider the situation in Start City. The weather had begun to warm up, and the ice and snow also showed signs of melting. Once the grass began to grow again, spring would come for the tribes on the grassland. The newly grown water plants would be very beautiful, which was also the favorite and happiest time of the nights. Of course, it was also the time when war broke out. How to seize this opportunity to expand the influence of Start City and expand their territory in such a season became a practical problem in front of the mercenaries. Well, the necessary preparations are necessary, but before that, we still have to deal with the enemies in Wandu City first. This is not only for revenge. Such a large-scale enemy will not be allowed to exist near Start City. Yang Chendong was determined to occupy Wandu City. Previously, General Mu Ran was there, and he cooperated with him. Of course, he couldn't attack directly. But now that it was changed to someone else, there was no psychological burden to occupy that place. What he lacked now was some understanding of the situation there. And this understanding was finally sent to Yang Chendong the next day. The ones who came to report were Feng Liang and Tai Hu. They knew very well what the sixth young master needed now. After the last report, the two began to work hard to infiltrate Wandu City. There were advantages of the coalition forces. For example, the force would be larger when they were together. The number of troops would be larger, and the combat power would be enhanced. But at the same time, there were many disadvantages, such as the chaos in management. Everyone served their own masters, and no one looked down on each other. It was precisely using this idea and gold and silver to pave the way. Soon, the Security Bureau bribed two middle-level generals and repeatedly verified from their mouths to get what they wanted. The first to report was Feng Liang. Sixth young master, the situation in Wandu City has been figured out. The enemy's strength is nearly 60,000 people. Among them, there are about 28,000 people from the Mongolian tribe in Ma Bei, 15,000 people under Agar Dorji, and 15,000 people under Fan Yuhai. In the Battle of Wandu City, the mercenaries were ambushed and suffered heavy losses. But in that harsh environment, they still killed nearly 2,000 people and launched a counterattack before they died. From this point of view, the intelligence of the Security Bureau was very accurate. Sixth young master, our people have successfully infiltrated the city. We finally found out that the thing that caused the fire was crude oil. Oh, it's this thing. Taihu took out a porcelain bottle from his bosom. It was filled with crude oil that he had obtained from the city. Chapter 826. Crude Oil. Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows and reached out to take the porcelain bottle. After opening it and smelling it, he nodded involuntarily. He had read about the so-called crude oil in some books before. This thing should be said to have been recorded as early as the Han Dynasty. It came out of the ground and was now known as crude oil. It was just that the people of this era did not know how to mine it or how to use it, so there were very few opportunities for it to be used in the military. Presumably, even the crude oil that caused the fire last time should have come out of the ground. It was the kind that could be easily obtained and used by the Mongolian army. If this was the case, then the combustion must be very strong. Everything was logical. So it's this thing. Have you found out where they got it from? Yang Chendong, who had more knowledge about crude oil, asked curiously. I've figured it out. This thing appeared in the low-lying area between Wandu City and Guangwu Town. Our people also went there to take a look. Although most of the crude oil has disappeared, if we look carefully, we can still find some. Taihu replied with his chest puffed out. It could be seen that this time they really put in a lot of effort and investigated everything very clearly. Is there still this kind of crude oil in Wandu City? Yang Chendong asked a question that he was very concerned about. I don't know yet, but please give us some time. We will definitely investigate it clearly. Taihu shook his head lightly and then asked for orders with a determined expression. It had only been 5 days since he had returned to the Holy Land. It wasn't easy to figure out the situation in such a short time. However, it was still impossible to fully understand the situation in Wandu City. Yang Chendong naturally understood this. He also knew that time was a little short, but he could not wait any longer. The mercenaries gave people the feeling that they were invincible and invincible. This was the reason why they were able to grow so quickly. On the other hand, if he lost again and again, no matter how much money he took out, there was no way he could restore the morale of his men. Of course, there was another more important reason. This time, someone had taken advantage of his absence to slap the mercenaries. If he did not return the favor, it would be hard to avoid rumors that would shake the morale of the army and would be looked down upon by the other forces. This was the main reason why Yang Chendong was so anxious to mobilize his troops. Be it the fact that the Mongol alliance army had heavily injured the mercenaries or the fact that they were occupying the city and not leaving, it was a provocation. If he didn't show any reaction after a long time, who would take the mercenaries seriously in the future? Wouldn't the various legends that had been created in the past all be for naught? This was something he absolutely would not allow. However, in such a short period of time, he had made up his mind to fight because of the news delivered by Feng Liang and Taihu. Now that he knew the exact number of enemies in Wandu City and knew that there was a very flammable crude oil in the city, this was an opportunity placed in front of him. Yang Chendong was very good at grasping opportunities, and this time would be no exception. Pass down the order. All divisions and regimental commanders are to come to the Yang residence for a meeting immediately. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with a bright light, and a bold plan had begun to form in his mind. After the 6th young master's order was passed down to the various battalions, the officers above the regimental level immediately rushed to the Yang residence. Soon, in the war room of the residence, all the officers stood there. They all puffed out their chests and looked at Yang Chendong, who was standing in front of the sand table with a calm and composed look. When all the regimental officers were present, Yang Chendong moved his gaze away from the sand table. At this moment, all the officers above the regimental level in the beginning city's military camp stood in front of him. They were the Independent Division Commander Tiger's Mane and Deputy Division Commander Xian Honghai, the regimental commander of the Fierce Tiger Regiment, Xiao Feng, renamed by Yang Chendong himself, the regimental commander of the 1st Cavalry Regiment, Zhue Feng, and the regimental commander of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Lu Zhua, the regimental commander of the 1st Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Su He, and the regimental commander of the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Shibi, the regimental commander of the Logistics Regiment, Beta Persei, and the battalion commander of the Reconnaissance Battalion, Su Yunsheng, enjoyed regimental treatment. That's right, Shibi was the first regimental officer to be promoted on the front line. Unlike the others, even Tiger's Mane and Xiaofeng, who was standing there, were people who had climbed up step by step. However, Shibi had indeed been directly promoted to the position of regimental commander from among the fallen generals. Before this person could be said to be unknown, but now, he was known to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Shibi's ability and wisdom were only known by Yang Chendong, who had the deepest contact with him. This person even had the same ideas as Yang Chendong when it came to matters. He was originally a general in the Tatar army, and he was half Han Chinese. Yang Chendong naturally had to put such a person in an important position. Naturally, there were some disagreements about Shibi becoming the regimental commander of the newly established 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, but this was the order of the war god, and no one dared to openly question it. Yang Chendong believed even more that as long as he gave the other party a chance to perform, it wouldn't take long for everyone to see his strength clearly. At that time, no one would have any doubts about Shibi's appointment. His gaze swept across every single one of them. At this moment, every single one of them had their chests puffed out, revealing a pair of tiger-like eyes, perfectly displaying their best mental state at this moment. Today, I called you all here for only one thing, and that is to attack Wandu City. There was no opening speech, not even any words to boost the morale of the soldiers. This was because Yang Chendong knew that everyone had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Sure enough, in the next moment, everyone's eyes were filled with excitement. For example, Tiger's Mane and the others' faces were filled with killing intent. They had been waiting for this bloody humiliation for a long time. Very good. From your state, I can see that you all should be prepared. Since that's the case, I believe that there shouldn't be any problems. Now, I will announce the military order. In the war room, Yang Chendong issued orders one after another. The officers who were called by name stood at attention and promised to complete the mission. A large net targeted at Wandu City was unfolded. In a sense, now is not a good time to launch an attack on Wandu City. First of all, the organization of the regiments was not complete. Take the Tiger Regiment, for example. Because they had to send a battalion the day after tomorrow to transport military supplies, their regiment should have 3,200 people after expansion, but now they only had 1,100 people. There was also the newly established 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment. They should have 3,200 people, but now they only had 2,000 people, which caused a lack of military strength. Secondly, even with the existing army, there were still the 6,000 recruits that had just been recruited, as well as the thousands of veterans from the construction team who had not yet fully adapted to the mercenary army style. Logically speaking, they should first unify the army and train them well before sending them to the battlefield. But in this way, it would take at least a month or two for them to complete their training, or even longer. Yang Chendong could not wait any longer. He did not dare to think about what the other grassland tribes would do if he could not display the powerful combat power of the mercenary army in a short period of time. He was afraid that at that time, he would not only have to deal with the 58,000 people of the Mo-Bay coalition army, but also more. He could not wait. Moreover, sending troops now could also have an unexpected effect. Yang Chendong believed that they had a 60% chance of winning this battle. If they also had advanced weapons and were prepared in advance, this battle could be won. A series of orders were issued. All the officers did not doubt him. Although they knew that they were lacking in various aspects, this was the order of the god of war. They had to obey. From the fact that the god of war could not win without a battle, they also firmly believed that this time the victory would belong to them. The officers accepted the order and left one by one. In the end, except for Beta Persei, everyone left. Then the tall but cheeky Beta Persei came in front of Yang Chendong. "Young master, let's make a deal. Don't let our logistics team stay at home. I want to fight too." "No." Yang Chendong's expression became much more serious. "Beta Persei, don't think that your logistics team's task this time is very light. Let me tell you, once the war changes, the safety of the entire beginning city will be in your hands." "Oh." Beta Persei was rejected and said listlessly. Beta Persei did not believe that the sixth young master would make a mistake. He was clearly comforting him. Yang Chendong seemed to have seen through Beta Persei's thoughts and shook his head. It was always difficult for him to harden his heart in front of the people closest to him. Well, don't have any psychological burden. If we win this battle, do you know how many captives there will be? When the time comes, your logistics team will be busy. As for how to screen out useful talents from these captives to join the mercenary army, that will be your business. This matter is of great importance. Beta Persei's expression became much more serious when he said this. The number of people in the logistics team was not fixed. It might only be a few thousand people at a time, and it might reach more than 10,000 people at a time. All of this depended on the performance of the soldiers on the battlefield ahead and how many captives they could capture. How to make use of these captives was indeed a very important matter. In other words, the logistics team's function was not only to cook for the soldiers, provide various weapons and logistical support. At the same time, they also had the role of fresh troops and replenishment troops. Once a good seedling appeared, and it was discovered that several regimental commanders were fighting over a captive, the distribution of the captives would eventually fall on him. This was a very popular job. Of course, this was also a very important job. Only the most trusted people would be placed in this position. Chapter 8:27. As soon as he thought of the sixth young master's trust in him, the grievance in Beta Persei's heart disappeared. Yes, young master, I completely obey your orders. You can rest assured that the logistics regiment will not let you down, but I can arrange for a deputy commander to guard the city for this battle. I can also follow you, young master, into battle. No. Yang Chendong once again rejected Beta Persei. This time, all the generals in the city who can fight have been sent out. You're the only one left. You can't leave. Otherwise, if something really goes wrong, it will be a big deal. Oh, I'll obey your orders. Seeing how resolute Yang Chendong was, Beta Persei also knew the principle of going too far and not going too far. There were some things that he could ask for instructions once, but he absolutely could not ask for instructions a second time. The battle meeting was over, and the barracks outside the first city began to quietly mobilize. In order to ensure that their military intentions were not known by the other party, all the members of the reconnaissance battalion were dispatched and sealed off 20 miles around the first city to ensure that no enemy scouts could approach here and spy on any changes in the mercenaries. Then, after a full day and night of preparation, on the second night, the divisions and regiments acted according to the plan. In the middle of the night, a large number of cavalry rushed out of the barracks and went straight to the city 200 miles away. Other than their own weapons, the cavalry did not bring anything else. Even the food on their bodies was only 5 days of dry rations, in order to ensure that their speed was faster. As a result, in the night, on the snowy ground, black shadows could be seen running quickly. In the season where the snow had begun to melt, the cavalry did not have to worry about falling into the snow when running, allowing them to exert their fastest speed. It was often said that a horse could travel 1,000 miles in a day and 800 miles in a night. That was unrealistic. Perhaps there were extremely special war horses that could do it, but this did not mean that it was possible. However, if they were to set off as soon as the sky turned dark, it would take them nearly 12 hours to reach dawn the next day. Traveling light and without any heavy supplies, it was still possible for them to cover 200 li in one night. When dawn broke, a large number of mercenaries with 5-starred flags suddenly appeared 20 li outside of Wandu City. They formed a fan-shaped encirclement, blocking the front and flanks. When the scout in charge of scouting outside the city saw this, he hurriedly returned to the city to report. When the cavalrymen in the city received the news, they immediately became restless. Only a small portion of the 50 to 80,000 cavalrymen had not been defeated by the mercenaries. Most of them had been defeated more than once. Suddenly, a large army of mercenaries appeared without any warning. It was easy to imagine how panicked they were at this moment. It wasn't just the soldiers, even Agadorji and Hararok, who had received the news, got up from their beds in a panic. They put on their clothes and rushed to the commander's residence in the city. By the time the father and son arrived, Sudra Khan was already seated in the hall, but his complexion wasn't good. It was obvious that he was frightened by the sudden news. What should we do? The mercenaries suddenly besieged the city. What should we do? Agadorji didn't wait for his, but to sit on the chair, and began to ask Sood for a plan. It was obvious that he was really panicking this time. Back then, he had nearly 50,000 cavalrymen, but they were still defeated by the mercenaries. Now, the entire Allied army only had a little more than 50,000 soldiers, and most of them were captured captives. Compared to the elites that he had brought, Agadorji didn't think that the Allied army would have any advantage in this battle. Don't worry, let's wait for General Fan. Seward was annoyed by the questions and pointed to the empty chair on the right. He really didn't have any ideas now. In his opinion, since the mercenaries took the initiative to attack, they must be prepared. He really didn't have any good ideas on how to deal with the enemy. He could only wait for Fan Yuhai to appear and see if he had any ideas on how to deal with the enemy. Agadorji noticed that Fan Yuhai hadn't arrived yet. His face couldn't help but sink. He coldly snorted and said, "What time is it now? Why isn't General Fan here yet? What is he doing? What is he doing? I'm afraid he still hasn't gotten up from that woman's belly last night." Haha. Hararok cooperated with his father. Then, a wretched expression appeared on his face. It was as if he had fallen into some kind of imagination. Sood helplessly shook his head when he saw the strange expressions of the father and son. As far as he knew, Fan Yuhai wasn't into this. At least during the time they were together, he didn't hear that Fan Yuhai had such a hobby. However, the mercenaries had already appeared outside the city. It was indeed strange that he hadn't appeared yet. The wait was always long. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Fan Yuhai, who was clad in armor, finally arrived. When he stepped into the hall, Hararaka's mocking voice sounded. "General Fan, you're so busy. I thought you would only appear after the enemy breached Wandu City." Fan Yuhai didn't stop as if he didn't hear the mocking voice. He walked to the chair on the right and nodded to Sood and Agadorji as a greeting. As for Hararok, who didn't even have a seat and had to stand to talk, Fan Yuhai didn't even look at him. It was as if he didn't exist. This time, Hararok was furious. The feeling of being ignored made him angry. He wanted to continue mocking Fan Yuhai, but at this time, Sood said, "General Fan, you know about the mercenaries outside the city, right? Do you have any countermeasures?" "Yes, I know. Just now, I went to the city wall to take a look. It was indeed mercenaries outside the city. Moreover, this time, the war god came personally." Fan Yuhai nodded. The reason he came late wasn't because he was lazing in bed, but because he went to the city wall first to understand the situation. Sood nodded in satisfaction when he heard Fan Yuhai say that he understood the situation. This was what a general should do. He wasn't a petty person who only knew how to stand there and mock others. Once on the battlefield, he wouldn't be of any use. It was just that the war was imminent, and this thought only flashed through Suda's mind. When Suda heard that Yang Chendong had also come, he asked in a daze, "War God is also here. Are you sure?" "Yes, the flag that belongs to the war god has been raised. Since he is in the grassland, there's no reason for him to not come out." Fan Yuhai didn't have a telescope, so he couldn't see that far. However, based on his intuition, he believed that this old opponent must be among the mercenaries outside the city. Seeing that Fan Yuhai was so sure, Sood's expression changed again. "Even the war god is here. I think they must be determined to get Huan City. What should we do?" "Of course we fight." Fan Yuhai blurted out as if he was talking about an extremely ordinary thing. Indeed, the mercenaries appeared so quickly. It had only been 7 days since the last defeat. They had made a comeback, which was indeed a bit beyond his expectations. In his opinion, after suffering such a heavy blow, the most important thing to do was to conserve energy and guard against them attacking the beginning city. Why would they take the initiative to attack others? However, the war god was the war god. His actions were always so unexpected. It had to be said that the sudden appearance of the mercenaries also caught Fan Yuhai off guard. Even now, he still couldn't figure out what the war god was thinking. However, not understanding the other party's thoughts didn't affect his decision to fight. "Fight? That's the war god we're talking about. Can we defeat him?" Agadorji opened his mouth, but his words weakened his own morale. It was obvious that he was really afraid of this person. This time, Sood didn't stop Agadorji from saying such words. In fact, how could he not be worried? He had lost 2 battles with the war god. At the worst, He was chased for thousands of miles until he fled to the northwest of the Inma River. All of this was enough to prove his thoughts. Why can't we beat him? The war god is also a human. He will also be injured if he is hit by an arrow. A saber can also take his life. Speaking of which, he is no different from us. Moreover, our military strength is clearly several times greater than the enemy's. In addition, we are in charge of defense, while they are in charge of offense. This makes it impossible for the muskets to display their greatest advantage. Fan Yuhai stated his decision and the basis for it. Then, his gaze fell on Suda. Obviously, he wanted this person to make the final decision. Su didn't immediately answer Fan Yuhai's question. Instead, he turned his gaze to Agadorji and asked, Lord Agadorji, what do you think of this matter? Agadorji wanted to express his opinion, but Fan Yuhai beat him to it. Lord Agadorji, we can't hesitate anymore. If we only think of running away because of the appearance of the mercenaries, when will we be able to defeat them? Moreover, in the last battle, we have already proven ourselves and proved that the mercenaries are not invincible. If we retreat without fighting this time, I'm afraid that we won't have the chance to win in the future. Are we going to live a life of hiding in the future? Are we going to live like rats in the dark for the rest of our lives? Fan Yuhai had to interrupt. Otherwise, once Agadorji expressed his opinion, there would be no need for this battle. He was afraid that they would really have to retreat. He had long heard that the Mongols ate meat while the Central Plains people ate grass. The grass eaters couldn't beat the meat eaters. However, when he came here, Fan Yuhai realized that the reality was not as he had imagined. Everything was reversed. The once glorious grassland cavalrymen were so scared that their legs turned to jelly when they heard the name of the mercenaries. They were already scared before the battle. Chapter 828. Originally, Agar Dorji wanted to call for a retreat. He was truly afraid of Yang Qindong, but now that Fan Yuhai said so, he didn't know what to say. On the other hand, although Suitor was also afraid of Yang Qindong, it wasn't to the point where he would retreat without a fight. Now that he heard Fan Yuhai's words, he pondered for a moment and asked, How confident are you in this battle, General Fan? At least 50%. Fan Yuhai answered quickly this time. Clearly, he already had a plan in mind. He was being conservative. He had already gone to the city wall to take a look. The sudden appearance of the mercenaries did scare some people, but the enemy's strength was limited. From afar, there were only about 10,000 people. If the three sides combined, there would be close to 60,000 people, and all of them were cavalry. In the past, such a force wouldn't be a problem to conquer the southern Ming Empire. But now, with 60,000 people against 10,000, what was there to be afraid of? 50%? Suitor nodded. Then we can fight. How about this? I will hand over the command of my Mongol army to you. I hope you won't betray this Khan's trust. The atmosphere in the hall froze because of this sentence. Agar Dorji raised his head in disbelief and looked at Suitor. Handing over the military power was equivalent to handing over all of his family's lives. Suda was really magnanimous. Thank you so much. Yuhai won't disappoint you. A look of surprise flashed across Fan Yuhai's face, but he quickly recovered. However, when he opened his mouth, the way he addressed Khan had already changed. He only called him Khan and did not mention his name, but it was already a sign of closeness. Good. Suitor seemed to be very happy when he heard the change in the way he addressed Agar Dorji. He wanted to see what Agar Dorji would choose. Agar Dorji didn't seem to hear the conversation at all. He just lowered his head and pondered. It was absolutely impossible for him to hand over his military power. He had never completely trusted a person. Back then, he didn't trust his elder brother Tuachuo Khan. Now, he couldn't even trust his own son Horror, let alone an outsider like Fan Yuhai who came out of nowhere. Agar Dorji didn't say anything. Suitor's face flashed with anger. What? I've already handed over my military power. Are you still not willing to hand over your 15,000 troops? If they wanted to defeat the mercenaries, they had to give it their all. They couldn't afford to have any other people involved. Since that's the case, Yuhai will go out and prepare. Fan Yuhai, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any intention of forcing Agar Dorji. Perhaps he knew that even if he tried to persuade him, Agar Dorji wouldn't hand over his military power. If he went overboard, it would only lead to internal instability. Since that was the case, it was better not to force him. Of course, he dared to make such a decision because he had the determination to defeat the mercenaries after taking over the military power under Sudkhan. So what if he was a war god? Without soldiers, how could he overturn the heavens with his own strength? After Fan Yuhai finished speaking, he didn't wait for anyone else to say anything and turned around resolutely. Sudkhan coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves, and stood up. He didn't even look at Agadorji, leaving the father and son alone in the hall. Father, they've all left. Let's go back too. Horror Dorji saw that there was no point in staying here with his father. He reached out to help his father stand up from the chair. Sigh, it seems like we can't stay here for long. Agar Dorji sighed from the bottom of his heart as he slowly stood up with the help of his son. In the past, he had a good relationship with Fan Yuhai. In fact, Fan Yuhai was even his subordinate. The two of them had joined forces to resist the powerful Sudkhan. But now, Fan Yuhai had obviously been roped in, which caused the situation to change drastically. The previous fairness had been broken. As the weaker party, it was naturally very dangerous to stay here. Now that there was a powerful enemy in front of them, no one would do anything to him. But what if the mercenaries retreated? Then it would be time to clean up the internal affairs. It would also be time for victory and defeat to be decided. Even if he wanted to leave, it wouldn't be so easy. War had always been like this. There was no definite right or wrong. No one would talk about benevolence, righteousness, and morality. Everyone was just trying to strengthen themselves. In order to achieve this goal, everyone might be friends eating meat and drinking wine together today. Tomorrow, they might draw their swords and fight to the death because of benefits. Agadorji's sigh was heard by his son, Halajuo. Halajuo was quite clever, so he suggested, Father, let's just watch from the sidelines for now. We don't need to worry about who wins or loses. Let's just let them fight until both sides are injured. This will only be beneficial to us. HM? Agar Dorji raised his head with a look of hesitation. Originally, he wanted to send some troops to express his goodwill. But when he heard his son's words, he felt that it was very reasonable. That's right, since they were going to fall out, what benefits would there be if he didn't send troops? At most, he would lose his own troops. In the face of a great enemy, who would dare to do anything to him? Since that was the case, he might as well laugh and watch the wind and rain. Perhaps there would be an opportunity for him. My son is right. How about this? Father is tired and needs to go back and rest. During this time, without my orders, my army cannot move a single soldier. Those who disobey will be executed. Agar Dorji's voice was like a flood, his expression firm. However, after saying this, his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had suddenly aged a lot. Even his steps became unstable. It was as if he really needed a good rest. If such a person didn't become an actor, it would be a waste of his talent. After Fan Yuhai obtained the military power of the Mongol tribe, he immediately gathered all the generals for a military meeting. With Sud Khan at the helm, although the generals had some opinions in their hearts, they did not show it. Instead, they followed the instructions of the meeting and started to send out troops. 2 hours after the mercenaries had surrounded the city, the Mongol army finally reacted. Troops with all sorts of flags came out of the city and formed a huge formation 5 miles in front of the city. Looking from afar, it looked like a sea of black, giving people a feeling that they were endless. In comparison, the 10,000 mercenaries that surrounded the city appeared to be a little weaker. However, when some people felt uneasy, they couldn't help but look at the war god's banner above the main formation. When they saw the more than 100 black riders below the banner, they felt reassured. As long as the war god was here, they wouldn't be afraid of any opponent or enemy. Even if the enemy outnumbered them by a few times, it would still be the same. The war god had such a godly power. Yang Qindong rode on the white dragon horse and stood in the middle of the formation. He used his binoculars to look at the Mongol cavalry coming out of the city. A hint of a smile flashed past his eyes. His gaze then became resolute as he calmly said to the flag bearer, "Order the entire army to prepare for the enemy's charge." Use guns from afar and arrows from close range. Don't get entangled with the enemy. The flag fluttered high up in the air. After this order was passed down, the independent division and the various regiments followed his orders and made their defensive preparations. The 6 gun battalions of the independent division had already been broken. They were split up in front of the other regiments. Just like that, each regiment only had 1 gun battalion. However, they were split up evenly. This also calmed the hearts of the soldiers, and they would not panic because of the enemy's charge. Outside the city, the Mongol army was gathering. They were constantly moving. To split up all the cavalry within 5 miles of the city was not possible. As such, the first to charge out were Lu Duo and Zamubala. Zamubala was one of Sud Khan's generals, while Lu Duo was a general that Fan Yuhai had personally trained. The two of them each brought 5,000 cavalry and guarded the left and right sides of the army. Within the army, Fan Yuhai's gaze had already landed on the city gates many times. However, he still did not see Agar Dorji's subordinates come out. He could not help but sigh as he said viciously, "Since you want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, don't blame me for settling the score with you after this." At this moment, Fan Yuhai had already developed a killing intent towards Agar Dorji. The two of them were not familiar with each other, and it was only because they wanted to integrate better that Fan Yuhai acted like he was inferior. He even expressed that he was willing to respect Agar Dorji, which was why he joined this alliance. However, right now, he had already gained Sud Khan's trust. Since that was the case, the stepping stone from before was no longer of any use, and it did not matter if he threw it to the side or stepped on it again. Although his heart was filled with killing intent, his expression did not change at all. Fan Yuhai raised his head and looked at the mercenaries in green uniforms 5 miles away. He raised his right hand and said, "Sound the drums. The left and right sides send out 1,000 cavalry each to test the waters. Dong, dong, dong." The sound of the drums shook the heavens, and every beat seemed to be able to strike one's heart, causing one's heart to swell with excitement. Under the sound of the drums, 2,000 Mongol cavalry slowly came out from the left and right sides, advancing step by step. Order Captain Windchaser and Captain Suhi to send out 1,000 cavalry each to engage the enemy. Tell them that this young master will be watching over them and waiting to give them rewards. Yang Chendong looked at the number of enemy troops and his expression was calm. Since the enemy had only sent out 2,000 cavalry, there was no need for them to use their guns. They would just have a battle of cavalry against cavalry. Chapter 829. Yang Chenong knew that this was just a test between the two sides. If he didn't even dare to fight with such a small amount of cavalry, it was inevitable that the morale of the army would be affected. Thinking of all the things that would happen next, if the morale of the army was affected now, then it would be even more difficult to handle. Rather than anything else, it was better to fight with the enemy and have a good start. The flag-bearer conveyed Yang Chendong's order. After Zhue Feng and Suhi saw the order clearly, they were extremely excited. This was the best opportunity to show off in front of the 6th young master. Usually, this was something that couldn't be obtained even if one begged for it. Now, they finally had the chance to show it off. Immediately, the 2 regimental commanders became the leaders of the vanguard without hesitation. Then, they chose 1,000-strong cavalry warriors. When the enemy was 2 miles away, they also slowly moved forward on their horses. "Comrades, the god of war is looking at us from behind. The opportunity is in front of you. How you want to perform depends on everyone. When you attack later, don't hold back. You have to show the military might of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Do you understand?" While riding forward slowly, Zhue Feng, as the regimental commander, gave everyone a mental preparation. Ba Tu, who had just performed a meritorious service, was in the cavalry regiment and was selected to be in the first 1,000 cavalry camp. He had once saved the life of Deng Yu, a battalion commander, on the battlefield. Because of his bravery, he was chosen by the regimental commander, Zhue Feng, and became the platoon commander of the 1st Company. At this time, Ba Tu didn't come alone. He brought a row of soldiers with him. At this time, his heart was surging. He knew that this was the time for him to show off. Thinking about how his family had changed because he had joined the mercenary army, and how he had found his life's work. His eyes were filled with an incomparably resolute fighting spirit. Comrades, this is our chance to show off. The god of war is looking at us. All our comrades are also looking at us. Our families in the beginning city are also looking at us. Then we can't let them down. In a while, when the battle starts, everyone will charge together with me. With the tip of the arrow, we will charge into the enemy camp. After we kill our way into the enemy's camp, we will follow the 3-3 battle strategy that we usually train in. Everyone will support each other and kill the enemy with ease. Kill them all, a platoon of 29 warriors said in a low voice. However, it was precisely this kind of muffled sound that was able to suppress everyone's killing intent and ensure that when the battle broke out later, they would be able to display astonishing strength. Not only Batu's platoon, but the other dozens of platoons were also secretly accumulating their strength and suppressing their killing intent, waiting for the moment to erupt. Time continued to pass, and the distance between the cavalry of the two armies continued to shrink. When the distance between the two sides was less than 2 miles, the generals of both sides gave the order for the entire army to charge. Charging 1 mile each was the minimum for the cavalry to charge. If they were any closer, they would not be able to display the flying ability of their warhorses. Both sides charged at pretty much the same time. The ground trembled at that moment, and the sounds of killing filled the ears of the first cavalry. The distance of 1 mile was completed in a dozen breaths of time. Then, there was a flash of blade light and people flew about. Windchaser was at the front. He held a sharp saber and wore a black cape. He was like a black whirlwind as he charged at the front of the 1,000 cavalry. On both sides of his body, there were over 100 riders following him. Under the leadership of this tip of the arrow, they were like a sharp knife, stabbing straight into the enemy's heart. With a move of Windchaser, around 100 meters away from him, tip of the arrow had already formed. They were either made up of 100 men in a company or 30 men in a platoon. They formed into arrows of various sizes, stabbing into the Mongol cavalry that were also charging. Using the speed of the warhorse, the sharpness of the saber, and his exquisite equestrian skills, the moment Windchaser charged into the enemy cavalry, he began to kill them. His arduous training of slashing out 1,000 saber strikes every day had finally paid off. Under the constant slashing of the saber, enemy cavalry after enemy cavalry were chopped off their horses. Their heads flew into the air one after another. Blood splattered into the air, showing the cruelty and cold-bloodedness of the battlefield. Windchaser's figure pierced in like a knife, quickly taking away a few lives. He also made a deep hole in the enemy's cavalry formation, allowing more soldiers to pour in and display their strength. In the next moment, Batu and the others, who were half a beat slower, finally caught up with the enemy. Then, they followed suit and charged straight in. When the power of the tip of the arrow reached its maximum limit, the enemy cavalry finally began to fall into chaos. They had only sent out 1,000 cavalry. Logically speaking, they should have gathered all these forces together to form a cohesive formation to charge in. This was the way of cavalry. The facts had already proven that the strength of the cavalry came from the might of their phalanxes and from their repeated charges. In such an environment, even if one's strength was extraordinary and could kill 1, 10, or even 100, could one fight 1,000 alone? If one could not do it or was slightly disappointed, then it would be time for one's heart to be pierced by 10,000 blades. That was why a cavalry charge was never the time to be a hero. If someone did that, they would be surrounded by 10,000 cavalry. Then, when there were enemies all around them, apart from 10,000 blades piercing through the heart, there was no other outcome. This kind of thinking had already been deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. It was precisely because of this that they were unable to adapt to the mercenaries' sudden change in tactics. They had originally been waiting for their companions to gather around them so that they could form a joint attack. Only now did they realize that they had been defeated one by one. Not only that, but the mercenaries' tip of the arrow was not just a single group. It was divided into more than 10 groups, attacking from different directions. It gave off a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere. The tip of the arrow formation was a cavalry killing formation that Yang Chendong had created himself after summing up the experience of the later generations. Imagining the Sharp Knife Squad, Sharp Knife Platoon, and Sharp Knife Company in the later generations, Yang Chendong thought that he could use this tactic on the battlefield. The so-called Sharp Knife was not the vanguard. The vanguard referred to the team that was the first to receive the enemy and take the lead. However, the Sharp Knife was just like its name. It was a sharp weapon that could pierce deeply into the enemy's heart. It was the kind of weapon that could kill the enemy with one stab. Of course, in order to become the tip of the arrow, there was a very important condition. The person who made the arrow had to be very brave, completely disregarding life and death. Only in this way could he break the enemy's cavalry formation and play the role he was supposed to play. Otherwise, even the tip of the knife would be broken before it entered the enemy's body. Not only would it not be able to display its power, but it would also cause the warriors behind it to become ownerless and eventually be scattered and killed one by one. It was not easy to find the tip of the arrow, at least for most of the Mongolian cavalry. However, this problem was not a big deal in Yang Chendong's eyes. This was because he had a lot of wealth that the grassland people could not compare to, as well as advanced weapons that other armies could not compare to. Ever since he returned to the beginning city this time, he began to advocate the combat method of the tip of the arrow. In order to achieve his goal, he offered very generous conditions. Once he passed the assessment and became the tip of the arrow, he would be able to receive double the reward of his other comrades. Not only that, he would also receive a set of bulletproof vests that protected his upper body to ensure that he could minimize his losses on the battlefield. This bulletproof vest was naturally not as powerful as the one in the big warehouse, nor was it as effective as the bulletproof vest worn by Yang Chendong. It was just a piece of clothing that looked like a horse clip. There were 2 steel plates and a lot of cotton in it. Even so, it was not a problem for it to deal with ordinary swords. With the generous rewards in front of them and the equipment that was enough to protect themselves, there was an endless stream of warriors who signed up to join the assessment of the tip of the arrow. Speaking of which, the people of this era were not afraid of death. They were just afraid that their deaths would not be worth it. Just based on the fact that the mercenary army had an extremely comprehensive pension policy for the dead warriors, especially the dead warriors who had rendered meritorious service, it was already worth many people to risk their lives. Once they died in battle, their families would benefit. There would be many people who would remember their good deeds. It was worth it to come to this world. It was far better than the other Mongolian soldiers. When people died, they died. No one would take a second look at them. Once they did not die and made meritorious service, the generous rewards would come. Not to say that they would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives, but at least they could live a stable life for many years. It was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Yang Chendong had always been very generous to the soldiers who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy. These people were fighting with their lives on the line. Based on this, they should be able to obtain even more. It was precisely because of this generous policy that the mercenary army could often fight 1 against 2, or even 1 against 5, or 1 against 10. Under the stimulation, the tactic of the tip of the arrow was formed. It was the first time it was used on the battlefield. The facts also prove that this method was feasible. You were like the strongest tip of the arrow. Windchaser was the first to charge into the enemy formation. Although he could not avoid being stabbed many times, with the protection of the bulletproof vest, he did not suffer much damage. On the other hand, the enemy was completely stunned by this tactic. When the tip of the arrow charged into their formation, chaos finally appeared. The strength of cavalry lay in their formation. Only then could they form an advantageous charge and cause damage to the enemy. If both sides were cavalrymen, whichever side panicked first would be the first to lose. Chapter 830. The formation could no longer display the strength that it should have. Under the constant barrage of arrows, the Mongol cavalry became scattered soldiers one after another. Without anyone protecting the left and right wings, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Often, before they could even charge out for dozens of meters, blood splattered all over their bodies, and they were either injured or killed. In comparison, the Windchaser cavalry with the tip of the arrows were like nails that had sunk into the enemy camp. They scattered the enemy and killed them one by one. Even if some of the soldiers had temporarily lost contact with their troops, they still had the 3-3 tactic. As long as there were 3 cavalrymen, they would be able to display the might of a small charging formation. Even if there were 10 cavalrymen, they would be able to hold on for a while. If there were too few opponents, then the saber would fall and the person would die. There would be no victory. On the other side, the Tatar cavalry commander Su, he had also become the tip of the arrow. In terms of individual strength, he was not weaker than Windchaser and was even stronger. He led the Tatar cavalry and charged forward. It was as if they had entered a place where no one could stop them. They killed group after group of Mongol cavalry and continued to expand the battle results. Beat the gong to retreat. Fan Yuhai, who was riding on the horse, had a deep gaze. If one looked closely, one could see the shock in his eyes. Seeing that there were not many cavalrymen left, and that they did not have the strength to attack anymore, he quickly gave the order to retreat. The Mongol cavalry who were lucky enough to survive on the battlefield felt like they had been pardoned. When they heard the sound of the gong, they quickly retreated from the battlefield. However, even the formation had been broken, so how could it be so easy for them to escape? In the process of retreating, not only did they have to endure the harassment of the mercenaries, but they also had to endure the pain of arrows when they finally managed to kill their way out of the formation. As they retreated, at least 100 cavalrymen were shot by arrows. Their fleeing horses fell to their deaths, dying on the path of hope that they had seen. In the end, less than 500 of the 2,000 cavalrymen that they sent out returned. Furthermore, almost all of them were injured, and their faces were filled with fear. Just this battle alone had broken the morale of some of the soldiers. No one could guarantee that such people would not go all out if they were sent to the battlefield again. In comparison, the Tatar regiment only suffered less than 100 casualties. Most of them were injured, and most of them had minor injuries. After some bandaging, they could quickly return to the battlefield. This was the strength of the mercenary army. Of course, the strength of the tip of the arrow was due to the strength of the formation, and of course, it was because most of the people sent this time were veterans and people who were good at fighting. However, the victory was right in front of everyone's eyes, and no one could question it. Fortunately, this was a fighting force formed by veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. Fortunately, there was a certain proportion of new recruits and captive soldiers in the opposing mercenary army. Otherwise, if this battle continued, there would be no hope for them. Zhue Feng and Suhi brought their troops back. What welcomed them were the cheers and congratulations of their comrades. For a moment, the 2 commanders and the soldiers who had followed them to battle all had happy expressions. At this moment, Yang Chindong's voice sounded out from the white dragon horse. Those who have done well in battle will be remembered. When we return, we will reward them greatly. Mighty War God! Mighty War God! Immediately, loud cheers resounded across the land. Not long later, the cheers grew louder and louder. Not only were the veterans cheering, even the new recruits who had just joined the army a few days ago, as well as the captives who had just been transferred from the construction team to the army, were all cheering loudly. At this moment, they were quickly assimilating into the mercenary army. They were experiencing what it meant to share glory and loss. When the shouts reached the other side, the expressions of the Mongol cavalry became very ugly. Before, there were some people who had looked down on the Mongol cavalry because of the Battle of Yindu a few days ago. They thought that the legendary powerful mercenary army was only SOSO. However, after witnessing this scene, they quickly closed their mouths. In comparison, they knew just how lucky and difficult their previous victory was. Of course, there were also quite a few generals who turned to look at Fan Yuhai, who was riding on his horse with an unchanging expression. In the previous battle, it was because they had listened to his suggestion that they were able to heavily injure the mercenary army. Now that the war god had personally appeared, they hoped that their general would be able to come up with a better plan. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change, but great waves had already risen in his heart. He had exchanged blows with Yang Qindong before, both directly and indirectly. However, that was only a battle of infantry. Yang Qindong had relied on his long-range firearms. However, the battle in front of him was completely a head-on clash. They had lost so badly and so quickly, which was out of his expectations. However, a famous general was a famous general. Fan Yuhai would not be discouraged because of a momentary defeat. He looked at the mercenary army on the other side and had a new plan in his heart. In the end, they had too few people. Moreover, the ratio of veterans was too low. This was their weakness. In a small-scale battle, they might be able to rely on this advantage to win, but what about a large-scale battle? Even if the casualty ratio was 1, 2, or even higher, he could still afford it. On the other hand, the mercenary army would not be able to take it. Once that happened, it would be time for him to counterattack. Pass down the order. Send out 5,000 cavalry from each side. Charge. The thought flashed through his mind and turned into words as Fan Yuhai spat them out. When Lu Duo and Zamubula heard this order, they were first stunned. Then, they understood what the general meant. They immediately cupped their fists and went to mobilize the cavalry. Sudkhan handed over the command of the battlefield to Fan Yuhai, giving him the authority to mobilize more than 40,000 soldiers. It was just 5,000 men from each side, so it was not a big deal. In just an hour, the cavalry was mobilized. Then, under the leadership of their respective generals, they slowly moved forward. Through the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw everything that the Mongol cavalry were doing. He laughed. Inform everyone to defend. Once the enemy charges into the range of the firearms, there is no need to be polite. If the enemy retreats, the cavalry will charge and use arrows to greet them. Fan Yuhai wanted to use the human wave tactic to exhaust him to death. This was indeed a good move. However, it also depended on whether Yang Chendong was willing to play with him. Since he had the advantage of the firearms, why not use it? Only a fool would engage you in a one-on-one battle. Previously, he had exchanged a move with you just to raise the morale of the troops. Since he had reached his goal, it was time to toy with the enemy. The flag waved. The officers who were waiting to be called out had no choice but to suppress their desire to charge forward and fight a good battle. Instead, they began to quietly watch the performance of the musketeers. Of course, it was not that they did not do anything. Instead, they ordered their soldiers to prepare their bows. The moment the enemy retreated, they would chase after them and beat them down. Within Yundu City, the news of the Mongol army's defeat had spread throughout the city. It was obvious that some people were shocked, while others lowered their heads and shook their heads. Hiraruo intentionally walked around the streets, then returned to his father's temporary residence with a face full of excitement. The moment he entered, he shouted, "Father, father, that traitorous Fan Yuhai lost. Hee, I knew it. Who does he think he is? How could he be a match for the war god?" In his heart, Hiraruo naturally hated Yang Chendong. If not for this person, he might have already become the son-in-law of the Mongol tribe. However, the hatred he had for Fan Yuhai was not small either. Although Fan Yuhai had never said that he was Agar Dorji's subordinate, in the eyes of this father and son pair, they had always thought so. Now that the two enemies were fighting, no matter who won or lost, it was something they were happy to see. In the courtyard, Agar Dorji was basking in the sun. He sat on a chair with a relaxed expression. Although there was a great battle going on outside, Agar Dorji wasn't worried at all. Even if the sky fell, there would be someone higher to hold it up. On the contrary, he was waiting for Sud Khan to beg him to send troops. When that time came, he would definitely ask for an exorbitant price. Seeing his ugly son yelling and screaming as he entered the courtyard, Agar Dorji shook his head helplessly. His son wasn't very capable, but his temper wasn't small. He really didn't know how his son was going to survive if he wasn't around one day. Halu Ruah seemed to only want to vent his feelings. He didn't insist on his father responding to his shouts. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, he turned and left. "Father, if there's nothing else, I'm going to find some fun. Staying in this courtyard is really annoying." The so-called fun was naturally looking for women. Mu Run, the original general of the city, had escaped. However, many of the citizens did not escape with him. The previous fire had only burned down the east of the city, and the other 3 cities were not affected. Not only that, some industries did not only survive, but because there were close to 60,000 Mongol cavalry in the city, some industries became even more lively than before. The fun that Hiraruo wanted to find was naturally the matter between men and women. He knew that his son was too ugly and had not married yet. In this aspect, Agar Dorji had always allowed him to do as he wished. However, Considering that the city wasn't very safe, he still nodded lightly to the guard captain beside him. A group of 10 guards followed him out of the residence. They were going to protect the young master's safety. However, what they did not know was that when Hilarua walked on the streets, behind him and his guards, someone was watching everything closely. Chapter 831. Fan Yuhai rode on his horse and stood outside the city. Before he left, he had already thought about the safety of the city. Hence, he had left his trusted aide, Zhang Ming, by Sud Khan's side to prevent any accidents from happening. As for Agar Dorji and his son, he had only sent people to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing trouble. This pair of father and son did not pique Fan Yuhai's interest, but the 15,000 cavalrymen under his command were something he was determined to obtain. He was even prepared to take over this force at any time. From this, it could be seen that this person had a grand plan. Outside the city, there were 5,000 Mongol cavalry on the left and right. A total of 10,000 Mongol cavalry had attacked. By the time they reached the center of the battlefield, they didn't see any reaction from the mercenaries. They did not send out their cavalry like they did at the start. This made the generals who were leading the cavalry feel confused. However, the beating of the drums did not stop, so their army could not stop. As such, they whipped their horses and charged forward. It was only a distance of 3 miles, but the cavalry charged forward for more than 2 miles. Just when they were 1 mile away from the mercenary camp, gunshots suddenly rang out. Pa pa pa. The gunshots did not stop, and the Mongol cavalry at the front fell off their horses like dumplings. 6 battalions, a total of 2,400 musketeers, squatted in front of the mercenary cavalry like a long snake, forming an impenetrable net of fire. Enemies within 500 meters were shot down one by one. The cavalry was very fast, and it should not be easy for the musketeers to hit a fast-moving target. However, there were too many enemies, and it could be described as a dense swarm. With such a formation, even a blind man would have a 90% chance of hitting the enemy. Not to mention, these 6 battalions had been trained for a long time. The gunshots were dense like firecrackers, and the response was that there were Mongol cavalry who fell off their horses at every second. As the numbers accumulated, more and more enemies died on the battlefield. Fan Yuhai, who was standing at the rear, couldn't help but feel heartache when he saw this scene. He knew more about guns than any of the Mongol cavalry generals, and that was why he knew how terrifying they were. Back then, wasn't the mighty Jiaoji kingdom defeated by such firearms? At that time, even the elephant soldiers could not gain the slightest advantage, let alone the charging Mongolian cavalry. The sounds of gunfire continued, and more Mongolian cavaliers died, but they were about to close the distance of 1 mile. At this moment, within the mercenary army, the sound of the bugle of charge rang out. Toot, 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 toot. The loud and clear sound stimulated the adrenaline in the human body, causing every soldier to have the urge to jump on their horses and raise their whips to go on a killing spree. Charge! Tiger's Mane, who was riding on his horse and wearing a white cloak, let out a loud roar. Then, he raised his saber and was the first to rush forward. Now, he urgently needed a great victory to prove himself and wash away the shame of his previous defeat. With Tiger's Man's shout, the various divisions and regiments all moved. In an instant, over 10,000 cavalry jumped out and swarmed over, shocking the Mongol cavalry. Retreat! Retreat! Seeing that the situation was not good, Fan Yuhai immediately gave the order to retreat. Immediately, the sound of the gong sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry who did not know what to do immediately turned around and ran. Their reaction was not slow, especially since Fan Yuhai's order was very timely, so they should be able to retreat safely. However, Yang Qindong had already given the order to make preparations. When Tiger's Man and the others charged, they raised their sabers as a feint. Seeing that the Mongol cavalry wanted to turn around and leave, they all picked up their sabers and chased after the Mongol cavalry and shot at them. The prepared bows and arrows shot out and landed among the Mongol cavalry. With a series of pili-pala sounds, over 1,000 Mongol cavalry were shot down from their horses, either dead or injured. This chase lasted for 3 miles. Only when they were in front of the enemy and under the city walls did the signal to retreat sound out. Immediately, the 10,000 mercenary cavalry received the order and retreated in an orderly manner. This caused Fan Yuhai, who was waiting for a chance to counterattack, to be disappointed once more. When the mercenary army retreated, there was no chaos at all. It was as if they had rehearsed this a long time ago. Whoever retreated first would stay behind to cover for them. Even if he sent out the cavalry now, he would not be able to gain any benefits. Furthermore, most of the cavalry were still in the city and had not been sent out. Even if he wanted to move them out, he would need time. This was the disadvantage of having a small city. Outside of the city, there was no way they could fit 60,000 troops. This was probably one of the reasons why Yang Chendong dared to bring his troops over to provoke them. The sky slowly darkened. In the second battle, they had not injured the enemy, but they had lost another 3,000 men. Adding everything together, they had lost close to 5,000 men. Retreat, all of you back into the city. At night, we need to tighten the defense and prevent the enemy from attacking at night. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change as he said to Lu Duo and Kamuba. After that, he rode into the city and headed straight for Sud Khan's residence. When Fan Yuhai saw Sud Khan, he reported everything that had happened today. He was already prepared to be scolded. However, unexpectedly, Sud Khan did not scold him and only nodded. The losses were not big. Have you figured out the situation of the war god? Fan Yuhai pondered for a moment before replying in a deep voice, "It's about time. The other party has too few soldiers. If we really fight, the one who loses will definitely be him. Therefore, he should only be trying to intimidate us. As long as we don't move out, the other party won't be able to take advantage of us and will naturally retreat." Good. Then I'll leave everything to General Fan. Against the war god, being able to defend the city without losing is already a great achievement. After all, this person is too famous. Even if you want to defeat him, it won't be done in a day. Suda actually tried to persuade him instead. Fan Yuhai immediately revealed a very moved expression and said, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." Suda's generosity was partly due to his appreciation of Fan Yuhai's ability. More importantly, the cavalry that died today were not his direct subordinates, nor were they the elites of the Mongolian tribes in Imo Bay. People like them might have been herders yesterday, but today they had become soldiers. There were many people like them in Imo Bay, so the loss of a few would not be a hard take. Fan Yuhai naturally saw this point as well. That was why he sent the cavalry that were not strong to test the enemy. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he did things appropriately. The Mongol army retreated back into the city, and the mercenaries cheered as they set up camp. They even lit up a huge bonfire. Under the light of the fire, be it the veterans, captives, or new recruits, everyone had a victorious smile on their faces. Today's 2 victories gave them great confidence. They were filled with trust towards the war god. They believed that under the leadership of the war god, victory would belong to them. Outside the central tent, there were many people moving around. 2 guards had switched positions to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. In the tent, Tiger's Mane stood in front of Yang Chendong and flattered him. Or rather, it could be said that he was not flattering, but speaking the truth. "Young master, you're just too amazing. Your formation at the tip of the arrows caused them to not know what to do. Using the musketeers against the cavalry, you use silence to stop them, effectively avoiding all sorts of problems when shooting while moving. If this goes on, before long, we'll be able to take down these Mongolian soldiers and wipe away the shame." Tiger's Mane was still speaking excitedly as if he was saying something great. However, Yang Chendong suddenly raised his head. "Do you really think that with our current formation, we can destroy the 60,000 Mongol soldiers in front of us?" Tiger's Mane was stunned by this sudden question. He stood there not knowing what to do. After being stunned for a long time, he did not know how to reply. Fortunately, Yang Chendong did not intend to make things difficult for him. He quickly answered his own question. "The enemy has 60,000 soldiers, and we only have 10,000. Moreover, there are many new soldiers and captives who have not fully adapted to our military rules. Relying on this force to defeat the Mongol army is completely impossible." It was not that it was impossible, but it was completely impossible. Just from this sentence, One could see that Yang Chundong's mind was still very clear. Then, he said, the only reason we were able to obtain victory today was because the old soldiers and musketeers displayed enough advantages. If the two sides really fought, then the loser would definitely be us. This is impossible. Tiger's Mane said in disbelief. Nothing is impossible. Tiger's Mane, as a general, the most important thing is to understand the situation and size up the situation. Doing something despite knowing that it is impossible is definitely not something a general of an army should do. It is merely the bravery of an ignorant person. Yang Chindong's expression did not change as he continued to speak in an extremely calm manner. This time, Tiger's Mane's expression changed again and again. He thought back to the defeat last time. It was because he underestimated the enemy and did not fully understand the enemy's situation before sending out his troops. In the end, he caused a huge defeat, causing the strength of the mercenary army to be greatly reduced. The sixth young master had no choice but to personally go into battle. Seeing the sudden change in Hu Meng's expression, Yang Chindong sighed softly in his heart. He spoke up once again. I have no intention of blaming you. In the previous battle, the army was defeated. Although you, as the main general, have to bear some responsibility, how many of the regiment commanders below you used their brains? They were all blinded by victory and thought that the mercenary army was truly invincible. Did they think that the moment the army appeared, the enemy would flee at the mere sight of it? They did not think about it. The Mongols have ruled here for so many years. How could they be so easy to deal with? If that was the case, the great Ming dynasty would not have sent out so many times and returned in defeat. Failure is not scary. What is scary is not knowing how you lost. That is a person who cannot be saved. Do you understand? Chapter 832. Hearing Yang Chindong's words, Tiger's Mane quickly replied, Yes, young master. We have already summarized our experience. If we don't understand the situation clearly, we won't easily send out troops again. I can promise you this. Yes. Yang Chindong's expression became a little better. Since they had already lost the previous battle, there was no point in dwelling on this matter. As long as the military commanders had learned their lesson and would not repeat the same mistake, the soldiers who had died in battle would be able to rest in peace. Sometimes, losing a battle wasn't scary. On the road to growth, encountering defeat was also a kind of harvest. It was a prerequisite for becoming stronger. As long as the heart didn't lose after a defeat, they could still have the heart to fight again. Moreover, the more they fought, the braver they became. Okay, you can go first. Take care of your own camp. In the next 2 days, we will only surround and not attack. Facing the enemy's challenge, we may even retreat to make concessions. At that time, the morale of the army cannot be shaken. You can go and discuss with the battalion commanders what to do. Yes, go and call over Zhuai Feng of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Yang Chindong raised the cup of hot tea in front of him and lightly waved his hand. Tiger's Mane was the first person he met. He definitely wouldn't be the last. He was making preparations for the following arrangements. There were some things he needed to explain to the commanders. Tiger's Mane left. Not long after, Zhuai Feng entered the main tent. After staying for half an hour, he left with his head held high. One by one, the commanders entered the main tent. Every one of them had a private conversation with the 6th young master for half an hour or more. That night, the main tent was lit with oil lamps. It was only when the sun was about to rise that it was extinguished. When the sun rose, the various armies began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals from the chimneys. The fragrance quickly spread everywhere. The army was a scene of bustling activity. 2 hours later, the two armies that had eaten their fill began a new day of confrontation. In front of the city, Fan Yuhai rode out. This time, the cavalry behind him was even larger. From afar, the number of people had already reached 20,000. Facing a mercenary army, especially one that was personally led by a war god, from Fan Yuhai's point of view, even if the entire army moved out, it wouldn't be excessive. The cavalry formed a formation of 1,000 men, and they quickly got into formation. Following Fan Yuhai's shout, 1,000 men charged out of the camp. The one leading them was Zamubola, the valiant general of the Mongol tribe in the north of the Gobi Desert. After Zamubala appeared, he led this 1,000-man team and charged towards the mercenaries. When they were about a kilometer away, he suddenly stopped. Countless experiences and facts had told them that this distance was relatively safe. Zambala, who had stopped his horse, began to challenge the mercenary general. He looked like he wanted to have a one-on-one battle with the mercenary general. 1 versus 1. This kind of battle strategy was used in the ancient times, had been past since ancient times. This was especially true for cavalry. They paid particular attention to the tightness of the battle formation and the momentum of the charge. With just one man and one general, the effect that they could exert was already very limited. A battle strategy like 1 versus 1 had not appeared in a long time. But today, it appeared in front of 2 armies. Many people's faces were filled with confusion. Then, some of the generals' faces were filled with excitement. It seemed like this was the time for them to display their individual strength and gain merit. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, had a calm expression. It was as if he didn't see the other party's actions. He didn't move. This caused many people to retract their gazes. They were originally waiting for the war god to pick their generals. But when they saw that the war god didn't move, they didn't dare to look. But there were still some brave ones who carefully spoke to their comrades. What's going on? Is the war god not letting us fight? Quiet. It's forbidden to make noise in the camp. The moment the soldiers below moved, the regiment commanders standing at the front of the group immediately stopped them. A few battalion commanders also cooperated and persuaded the soldiers below, suppressing the discussion. The various divisions and regiments were all like this. Yang Chendong saw this from the corner of his eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. The results of last night's discussion were pretty good. At least the regimental commanders understood his intentions. With their suppression, the army probably wouldn't fall into chaos, but their morale would definitely drop. But this was something that couldn't be helped. The difference in numbers was too great. In order to launch the final attack, they couldn't afford to lose any of their forces. Speaking of which, last night, Yang Chendong had already thought of a countermeasure for Fan Yuhai. If the 2 sides' roles were reversed, he would have at least 2 paths to take. The first was to use the strength of the army and use the advantage of numbers to launch a fierce attack. For example, he could directly send 30,000 soldiers and then send 10,000 soldiers behind to launch an all-out attack, using the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy. In the face of tens of thousands of enemy cavalry, even the strength of a flintlock was limited. Once they charged over, the effect of the flintlocks would be limited, and it would be difficult to win this battle. Of course, if he decided to do this, he would have to pay a heavy price. From this point of view, the possibility of Fan Yuhai's choice was relatively low. After all, he only had 15,000 men under his command. He could wipe out his own army, but if he really wiped out the cavalry of the Sud Khan, the Khan would definitely not do it. If the first point didn't work, then there was only the second point left. That was to send out a small portion of the army to challenge and slowly nibble away at the strength of the mercenaries, using small victories to accumulate a big victory, then expanding the results of the battle. The advantage of doing this was that not only would they not lose too much, but they could also continuously reduce the strength of the mercenaries. And when the number of mercenaries was reduced to a certain extent, it would be time to implement the first plan. At that time, if the number of mercenaries was too low, facing tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, they could only run. These were the 2 methods that Yang Chendong thought of for Fan Yuhai. Looking at it now, the other party had indeed thought the same and sent out a 1,000-man team to challenge them. A 1,000-man team was naturally not scary. Yang Chendong could casually send out a commander or even a battalion commander to lead a 1,000-man team. With the sharpness of the arrows and the sharpness of the cavalry swords, they could win. But this kind of victory was impossible without paying a price. If 100 men died in one battle, then 1,000 men would have to pay 10 times the price. As time passed, the mercenaries would definitely be the first to be unable to bear it. Not to mention, in a 10,000-man team, there were only a few veterans. Once the battle was over, their effective fighting strength would be worn out by the challenges one after another. How would they have any strength left to launch an all-out attack? Thus, The best way to deal with this kind of challenge was to ignore it and act as if he didn't see it. And with the huge range of the firearms, the other party would naturally be helpless. The only drawback was that in the long run, the morale of the soldiers would definitely take a big hit. This was the biggest test for the mercenaries. Seeing through the other party's intentions, Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't let them succeed. Thus, there was the current strategy of not moving to deal with the changes. Zamubala, who was 1,000 meters away, had already prepared himself for a battle. However, when he realized that there was no movement from the other party after half a day, he thought of Fan Yuhai's instructions and immediately started cursing. He cursed and scolded, calling him a coward, a pussy, and so on. In the end, it was all kinds of insults. What was even more impressive was that Fan Yuhai seemed to have been prepared for this. He even found a cavalryman who could speak Mandarin. While cursing in Mongolian, he also spoke Mandarin. When his voice echoed throughout the land, one could imagine how ugly the mercenaries' expressions were. Battalion Commander, I request to fight. Battalion Commander, I also request to fight. Even if I die on the battlefield, I can't let them humiliate us like this. Yes, we request to fight. Under the scolding, some of the more impulsive soldiers couldn't hold it in anymore. Their faces turned red as they shouted with a belly full of anger. All of you, shut up. All the battalion commanders had been called by their regiment commander for a meeting last night. Naturally, they knew what to do. Although they were also very angry in the face of such a situation and even wanted to rush forward with their swords, they couldn't go against military orders. They could only obey. With the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, although many of the soldiers were a little emotional, it didn't cause any chaos. Under the scolding, many of the soldiers had no choice but to shut up. But from their angry faces, they only obeyed the orders and didn't understand it in their hearts. After a round of scolding, Zamubala retreated with some disappointment. In return, an unknown young general appeared with 1,000 men. They still had the appearance of a challenge. After not getting a reply for a long time, a new round of scolding began. Naturally, it attracted a wave of dissatisfaction from the warriors and their request for battle. Just like that, the cycle repeated again and again. The dissatisfaction of the mercenaries grew stronger and stronger. However, under the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, no one dared to go against military orders. But at this moment, the morale of the soldiers had started to drop, and it continued to drop. The sky was finally turning dark, and the Mongol cavalry also started to retreat. One by one, they retreated back into the city. The mercenaries also started to set up camp. Hot meals were sent to the soldiers, but for some reason, most of them did not have any appetite. It was obvious that everything that happened today had made them very depressed, and they were very stifled by their anger. At night, after the soldiers went into their tents to rest, some of the battalion commanders finally couldn't take it anymore and stood up. They went in front of their regiment commander and asked for instructions on what to do next. There were also some battalion commanders who expressed their worries. Based on their thoughts, could they ask for instructions from the war god to fight a few battles tomorrow? If not, the morale of the soldiers would drop too quickly and it wouldn't be easy to lead the troops. The oil lamp in Yang Chendong's main tent was still lit. Yang Chendong closed his eyes and wore a large cloak as he sat on a chair beside the stove. But even until dawn, he didn't see any regiment commander come forward to request to fight. Chapter 833. When the sky started to brighten, Yang Chendong, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He then chuckled and muttered to himself, "Not bad, not bad." Tiger's Mane and the other commanders did not come to complain to him. This proved that they could still control the army. Just based on this point, he was not disappointed. But after laughing, Yang Chendong looked outside the tent that was already bright and couldn't help but shake his head. Today is also a difficult day. Just as they had expected, after both sides got into formation again, the Mongolian cavalry's challenge began again. Just like yesterday, there were still groups of 1,000 men walking out. They were shouting and cursing, and all sorts of insults were thrown out. Those insults were as unpleasant as they could be, and once again, It caused the soldiers below to angrily rebuke and request for a fight. In fact, it was even louder than yesterday. Left with no choice, the battalion commanders had to order a few of the shouting soldiers to be captured and brought into the tent. Only then did they suppress the soldiers' anger. However, anyone could tell that this was just a stopgap measure and not the final solution to the problem. On the contrary, if they captured too many of these people, the ones left would probably be a bunch of weaklings. If these soldiers were to be used as the main force to kill the enemy, their might would be weakened by 30%. Below the city walls, Fan Yuhai looked at all of this with great interest. He was in a good mood. In this battle, the mercenaries had too obvious a weakness, and that was that they had too few soldiers. After finding this weakness, he used the tactic of 1,000-men battle in order to continuously grind the enemy's military strength. Once the enemy's military strength was reduced by half, it would be time for him to attack. He never thought that the mercenaries would be so tolerant. This was indeed out of Fan Yuhai's expectations, but it also made him very happy. One had to know that not everyone dared to insult the mercenaries in front of them. Since he was able to do so, wasn't it already considered as proving his strength? More importantly, under this kind of cursing, the morale of the mercenaries would definitely drop very quickly. If he did not control it well, it was possible for the army to mutiny. Even if they managed to control the situation by force, as time passed, the morale of the army would drop. Could such an army still win the war? Fan Yuhai was happy to wait. He wanted to see how long the mercenaries could last. As long as they showed any signs of weakness, he would definitely launch a fierce attack. At that time, he would become the first general to defeat the war god. What's the situation in the city? While Fan Yuhai was enjoying the cursing of his own soldiers, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Deputy General Lu Duo beside him. "General, the situation in the city is normal," Lu Duo replied. Then, as if he understood Fan Yuhai's worries, he smiled and said, "General, don't worry. Although the defense of Jiangdu City is very tight, the mercenaries will not have any chance to steal the city." "Yes, I'm not worried about them stealing the city. I'm worried about other things that we don't know about," Fan Yuhai said in a deep voice. Could it be that the mercenaries were here to scare them? Did they want to scare them away and regain their face? Once they couldn't scare them, they could only hold on like this. But this didn't seem like the style of the war god. But if there was another purpose, what could it be? Fan Yuhai couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could do was to complete the task at hand. Send someone to inform Zhang Ming and ask him to pay more attention to the situation in the city. Also, ask him to protect Sade Khan. We must not give Agadorji any opportunity. Fan Yuhai couldn't think of what else the mercenaries might do. He could only order Lu Duo. What he didn't know was that there was a saying in ancient times to take the head of a general from an army of 10,000. There was also a term in later generations called Operation Decapitation. Operation Decapitation was the real purpose of Yang Chendong this time. The soldiers outside the city were all serving this military goal and mission. As early as when the Wolfang Special Forces was just established, one of the main military tasks that Yang Chendong gave them was to decapitate. The commander was the commander of an army. Once the news was spread, it would completely destroy the other party's command center and will to resist. The image of, to catch bandits, first catch the leader, hit the snake where it hurts reflected this idea. The elements of Operation Decapitation were speed, accuracy, and cooperation. Even if the number of enemies this time was several times their own, the effect of ordinary means could be too small. Especially with a famous general like Fan Yuhai, it was even more difficult to win with wisdom. Therefore, Operation Decapitation became Yang Chendong's first choice. Compared to the mercenaries who had guns and even cannons, the existence of the Wolfang Special Forces was still very secret. It could even be said that it was not known to outsiders. It was precisely because others didn't know that once it was used, the effect would be greater and it would be easier to succeed. If the other party was a large military camp, the commander would be in a military tent protected by layers of military camps. It would be too difficult to carry out Operation Decapitation. But now the enemy was resting in the city, and there were many civilians in it, which created enough conditions for Operation Decapitation. In the military tent of the same army, Yang Chendong changed his seat in front of the sand table. His eyes were fixed on the area marked with Wandu City, and the frequency of his breathing became much slower. Report. The voice of the first guard Captain Xiao suddenly came from outside the door. Sixth young master, Battalion Commander Su Yunxing wants to see you. Let him in. Hearing this, Yang Chendong leaned back on the chair. He knew that the conditions that should be prepared were sufficient. The next step was to see the performance of Tai Hu, Bai Zhuo, and others in the city. Fan Yuhai was very careful. Every night before going to bed, he would walk around the city tower to see the army's night deployment. After making sure that nothing would go wrong, he would leave with satisfaction. But he didn't know that Yang Chendong didn't mean to send the army for a night attack at all. His hope was on the Wolfang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team that had already entered the city. These two teams had limited personnel, only a few dozen people. If they wanted to enter the city, they wouldn't arouse suspicion at all. Although the 4 gates of Wandu City were closed since the sudden appearance of the mercenaries, in fact, Tai Hu and others had already entered the city a few days ago in disguise. Now they were making all kinds of preparations in the city. If words had to be used to describe it, it was like Sun Wukong who got into the belly of Princess Iron Fan and was ready to make a big scene. Even during the war, there was no curfew in Wandu City. They were different from the Great Ming dynasty. They never had such a saying in consciousness. Therefore, even though the sky was completely dark and it was already midnight, one could still see some shops on the streets lit up by oil lamps. There were also some figures walking back and forth on the streets from time to time. The Drunken Pleasure House was the largest and the best business in the city. It was also the largest brothel in the city. In a private room, the 2 teams of Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo, who had been dressed up, were drinking here. At the same time, they were also discussing tonight's action. Beside them, 2 women wearing revealing clothes and heavy makeup were sleeping. No one would have thought that in a place like this, there would be people who spent money but didn't buy sex. Not to mention that they were on a mission, and not to mention that these 2 women were too ugly to look at. Their military discipline didn't allow them to do this kind of thing when they were on a mission. So the 2 of them didn't even look at the 2 women who had fainted after drinking the knockout drug. Instead, they lowered their voices and made plans for the night. The army has been out for 3 days. This is the deadline that the 6th young master set for us. We must act tonight. How are the preparations on your side? Bai Zhuo was half lying on the table. He looked at Tai Hu, who was close by, and asked in a low voice. Everything is ready. Skinny Monkey and King Kong are watching that kid. Tai Hu narrowed his eyes, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. Even his murderous aura had been completely concealed. The 6th young master once said that a real assassin wouldn't reveal a trace of murderous aura. If they couldn't do this, then they were unqualified. Now, Tai Hu had entered this realm. Good, then I'll wait for you to make a move. After Bai Zhuo said this, he poured a cup of wine on himself. Then, he walked out of the room with a strong smell of alcohol. At this time, the Drunken Pleasure House was the best time to seek pleasure. Rashly leaving would attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. However, the smell of alcohol was completely different. It was the best cover. After Bai Zhuo left, Tai Hu also stood up. Then, he put his right hand to his mouth and whistled. Naturally, people with ulterior motives could hear it. However, for those who were drunk, this sound wouldn't attract the slightest bit of attention. They would only think that a wanton person was doing something rash. After the whistle sounded, in the best private room of the Drunken Pleasure House, a man who was sleeping with 2 women in each arm suddenly felt a chill on his neck. Then, a piercing chill rose from his heart. Instinctively, he reached out to grab the dagger under his pillow. Hala, if you're a young master, why struggle? You should know that since I've come here, I naturally won't give you any chance. A skinny man who only weighed about 80 kilograms chuckled, revealing a harmless smile. However, if one looked carefully, it wouldn't be difficult to see that there was a hidden killing intent under his laughter. The person lying on the bed was Hala compared to Fan Yuhai, who was fighting war god outside the city every day. He was cooped up here every day, enjoying what he thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. However, he didn't expect that someone would suddenly appear in front of him. How did he get in? Why didn't the guards outside notice? Chapter 834. Questions popped up in his mind one after another, but at this moment, he couldn't think too much because the dagger on his neck had already pierced his skin. The feeling of blood flowing down his skin was like a worm crawling on his skin. Feeling that his life was in danger, Haliruo's face changed. Compared to other people, he was more afraid of death. Especially after enjoying so much in the world, he was even more afraid of death. He was afraid of losing everything. Brother, don't be impulsive. What do you want? Whether it's money or an official position, I can give it to you. Presumably, you already know my identity. I can satisfy you. Seeing Haliruo's cooperation, Skinny Monkey-like couldn't help but nod. Very good. I like to deal with smart people. Tell me, where is the crude oil in the city, and what's the password for tonight? Crude oil? You. Who are you? Haliruo's face changed greatly. Whether the other party wanted money or an official position, he believed that he could satisfy them. But when it came to crude oil, he had to be careful, because that thing was something that even his father didn't want to provoke. As for the identity of the person who inquired about the crude oil, it seemed like it was about to be revealed. The dagger slid down and suddenly reached the dark fatty's chest. Then, it stabbed lightly. Haliruo immediately felt a bone-piercing pain, causing his face to contort in pain. At this moment, the skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. It seems like you still don't understand the situation. Since that's the case, I'll leave a mark on your body. No, I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything. Knowing that his life was in the hands of others, Haliruo didn't dare to play any tricks. He hurriedly begged for mercy and told the skinny monkey-like man the location of the crude oil. It's in the warehouse in the west of the city. That used to be the city's granary. Take me to see it. Remember, kid, don't play any tricks. Otherwise, I promise I'll take your life before you can shout. The skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. The warehouse in the west of the city was where the crude oil was located. But without seeing it with their own eyes, they couldn't be at ease. Trembling, Haliruo put on his clothes and opened the door. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 4 guards guarding the door. When they saw the young master walk out, they quickly lowered their heads and saluted. However, when they saw the skinny monkey-like figure, the 4 guards couldn't help but reveal a trace of confusion in their eyes. They had been watching outside the door and didn't see any man enter this room. Where did this person come from? How could they know that one of Skinny Monkey's specialties was the bone shrinkage skill? Although the gap in the window outside the door was not very big, it was enough for him to use his unique skill to enter. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, young master will dig out your eyes. When the skinny monkey-like figure noticed that the 4 guards were looking at him, he glared back fiercely. At the same time, he gently applied some force to the dagger behind Haliruo's waist. Cough, don't look around. She's one of us. Although he could speak freely now, he knew that if he said something he shouldn't say, the first one to fall would be himself. As soon as he said that he was one of them, the 4 guards immediately showed a look of understanding. They lowered their heads slowly with an expression that said, "We understand." Clearly, they had misunderstood and thought that their young master's taste had changed. He no longer liked women, but men. Angered by the 4 guards' gazes, Haliruo really wanted to shout, "Your young master doesn't have any other hobbies." Even if he did, he wouldn't like such a skinny man. Of course, he could only think these words in his heart. Shoho accompanied the young master and the 4 guards as they walked towards the entrance of the drunken pleasure house. Along the way, many girls greeted him warmly, but because he had something on his mind, he did not reply to any of them. Haliruo only had one question in his mind. When he left the door, there would be 6 more guards. At that time, would they be able to turn around and attack him? Haliruo couldn't guess if these people would kill him after achieving their goal. So if there was a chance, he would definitely give it a try. And this thought disappeared as soon as he walked out of the door and met up with the 6 guards at a street corner. Not for other reasons, but because of the sudden appearance of 3 strangers. The short blades in their hands danced, and in a few moments, the seemingly tall and strong guards were all killed on the ground. And the other side only had 4 people, including Skinny Monkey. The 10 guards didn't even have time to figure out what had happened, and all of them died from fatal injuries. All of this fell into Haliruo's eyes. He immediately said in horror, You just want to look at the oil, not kill people, right? Of course not. The skinny monkey-like man chuckled. If you're obedient, I won't kill you. I can assure you that I won't kill you. All right, now that there are no more annoying flies, we can go. The 10 corpses were thrown into an inconspicuous corner in the darkness. Haliruo, with 4 guards following behind him, headed straight for the warehouse in the west of the city. Along the way, the soldiers sent by Fan Yuhai and his father, Agar Dorji, were all taken care of one by one. Perhaps they thought that they were hiding very well, but in front of the well-trained and inhumane Wolf Fang members, their every move was magnified like a magnifying glass. As they made their way to the warehouse in the west of the city, Haliruo was still waiting for something to happen. He knew that his father had secretly arranged for people to follow him. As soon as they appeared, he would seize the opportunity to escape. But unfortunately, the journey was incomparably peaceful. He even saw 2 groups of Mongolian cavalry patrolling the streets. Haliruo, who cherished his life, didn't have the courage to shout out. Since Skinny Monkey had sworn an oath to longevity heaven, he had no choice but to believe him. It had to be said that Wolf Fang had chosen the right person. A person who was extremely afraid of death would definitely not play around with his life. Just like that, the 5 of them successfully arrived at the warehouse. From afar, they could see a group of about 100 Mongolian soldiers guarding the place. When they saw someone approaching from afar, one of them shouted loudly, "Who are you? Leave immediately." Haliruo was clearly startled by this shout, and his footsteps came to a halt. At this moment, a dagger was poked at his waist. Skinny Monkey's devilish voice sounded out again. "What are you afraid of? Have you forgotten your identity?" Haliruo, who was originally covered in a layer of cold sweat, finally remembered who he was. From the moment he was threatened until now, he found that his courage was becoming smaller and smaller. After being reminded by Skinny Monkey, his heroic spirit rose and he took large strides forward. At the same time, he shouted, "Who are you? You don't even recognize your family's young master?" As he walked closer and closer to the warehouse, the guard saw that it was Haliruo and his 4 guards. He couldn't help but straighten his body. "So it's young master. But I don't know what you're doing here so late at night." I'm following my father's orders to get some oil." Haliruo followed Skinny Monkey's instructions and walked towards the warehouse with his hands behind his back. Password. Seeing that they were about to enter the warehouse, a Mongolian soldier followed the rules and blocked Haliruo's path. "You dare to block me?" Haliruo pretended to be very angry and roared, "Have you forgotten that your master, Fan Yuhai, was once my father's subordinate?" Of course, these words were a bit too big. They were just temporarily treating Agadorji as their leader. Of course, no one would mention this matter at this time. Seeing that Haliruo was angry, the guard hurried over. Young master, don't lower yourself to the same level as this servant. He doesn't know your identity, haha. He doesn't know, but you do. Isn't it enough that I'm standing here alone? Can't I go in and take a look?" Haliruo put on a demonic expression as he looked at the guard general. He looked like he would fly into a rage at any moment and even start beating people up. Haliruo's reputation in the army was naturally not good. He didn't have much ability, but he was arrogant and had a bad temper. However, he had a good father. If he really provoked him and beat him up here, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to say anything even if he was in the right. The guard naturally understood this logic. He wouldn't go against his young master because of a password. He immediately smiled apologetically. "Young master, of course I know you. It's just that if you want oil, you can't go in?" Haliruo thought that the guard was being tactful. However, after hearing his reply, it was clear that this wasn't the case. Haliruo's face fell. Young master, don't be angry. I'm not stopping you. I'm just telling you that there's no more oil inside. It's all been moved away." The guard came forward and said softly, "Moved away? Why didn't I know about this?" Haliruo's face was filled with shock. This wasn't an act. He really didn't know. Oh, this was an order from General Fan. Not long after the sky turned dark, the oil was moved away. The guard naturally couldn't say that this was a secret order from Fan Yuhai. If he said that, it would seem that Fan Yuhai didn't trust Agadorji and his son. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.